community, but it's also around 20, say roughly is about 25% of all the calls for service within the city of Auburn for the police department occur in that half square mile. About 28% of all the youth victims live in that half square mile. So we know that that's that target neighborhood that we really need to be focused on. And we can provide you more of that information as we move forward, but that, I would say that's our target number.
Councilor Zani?
Thank you.
Let's go right around.
I just want to ask, in terms of bringing it under the rec program, which I think is a great idea, how does that affect the funding stream? Is this totally funded through grants and donations?
So currently, probably about 2 years ago, I think, Jill, we started putting a expense line item in the rec budget for PAL with an offsetting revenue line item, with the goal that the PAL Center rather would be able to provide about $25,000 to the city as revenue, and we would have on the other end about $25,000 in expenses. And that was really covering the part-time position that we've already moved into the PAL Center. We would start expanding that, but probably the revenue, unless we started expanding the programming, which would be at a fee, would pretty much stay the same. The PAL board struggles to hit that $25,000. I don't think they have yet. And what they would normally have had for their large fundraising event because of COVID was canceled this year. So they're really not going to hit that mark this year. But it doesn't mean that the PAL board can't focus on grant funding. Now that we have a grant writer, we can continue to work on that.
And one last question, building on what Councilor Carrier said. That's the capacity, the number of kids. When you look at sort of the scale of a space, ideally, is it double, triple size? I know you're just getting into that, but what's...
Yeah, I'm not certain. We'd have to
Okay.
really look at that. And we'd want to know what we want to provide there as well.
Programming.
And when you'll be working through that conversation to present something when?
We would start presenting it in the CIP, probably the 5-year plan CIP.
Great.
Because that's not something we would be able to turn around right away.
Right.
So coming up, but getting some feedback is helpful. So that way we can start developing the plan based on what the council has a desire for.
Thank you.
Councilor Milks? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Walker?
Thank you. I'd just like to throw my 2 cents out there a little bit. We've got some property over there right now that's really all stressed out. I think it's been for sale or sitting there, owned by a bank, that we really should look into and grab and not wait 5 years out. I think that would be something that would be possible to move forward with, because the building you're in now, if you're talking 200, you would have to expand that building probably 3 times the size it is. And you've got the big water drainage problem there under that lot and near the playground equipment that we have downtown here. So I don't know if we'd want to get involved in that too much. It would be worth more for the city, the CDBG to get involved, and maybe some other funding that we put aside to tear down buildings, to purchase that piece of land. That's probably 3 times the size of 4 of that building right now. So, and it kind of takes you out of the way of the straight angle from the basketball court up over the hill to the footballs, soccer, whatever else we play. I think we really need to look and lean that way. I believe we have the money in our budget, number one, and having a focus on how we're going to move forward. You couldn't ask for a better spot where that piece of land is just sitting there waiting for someone to buy it.
So we hope you'll see something soon on that. I think Councilor Milks, as chair of the CAC, had a conversation with us probably very early on about some opportunities around there. Staff has been working on that and looking for opportunities, and if that is able to happen, it'll be brought back before the council really soon.
Councilor Boss?
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm glad to see the PAL Center space come in a future CIP. I think it's really important. And I also have a question with the PAL Center, it being the Police Activities League. how does that functionally change the offerings moving from the police department to the rec department? Is there police officer engagement in the programming now, and will that continue with that shift, or just more information on that?
I would say the current engagement would continue, and that's really some of the programming that takes place. One of the officers will go over, one of the school officers will go over. Challenge with a lot of the school officers is that after school is usually when they've already had their full school day, so really it's about the beat officer stopping in and being part of programming. That's currently happening when they're able, schedule allows for that. That would continue as it is, so. But the police department really isn't involved in the programming other than being involved in the board, at the board level.
I think, Counselor Gary, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm concerned when I hear the word fees and stuff, because the PAL Center right now fits the niche of that neighborhood that can't afford the fees that the rec department charges.
So it would be the same as, most of those kiddos that come in are all either free or reduced lunch, which means that there would be no cost for them coming in. But we do have other needs within that neighborhood that, we have a lot of kids from that neighborhood that still come down there that currently, you're right, it doesn't cost anything to go in. If it's more of a program, an after-school program, that's when we would look at, potential fees. That would be up to the council, but, those fees would be based off from family income. So it wouldn't restrict somebody from coming.
Now, if the city takes it over and we change it, and we're trying to make it as affordable as we can, would it work similar to the Boys and Girls Club, where the kids, they only pay like a $5 membership fee? I mean, I'm not opposed to a minimum fee for a kid. I mean, like a 5, maybe even 10 for the year. And far as I know, the Boys and Girls Club don't charge for their programs or extra things.
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of talking about individual fees. I will say that there's also usage fees too. Daytime rental when the kids are at school. If you have a facility that's not in use, I always say it's a useless facility. And you maximize effectiveness by third-party rentals, whatnot. But before we go into that, I think, I want to just get back and pose these two questions. One question, and again, I'm kind of building some consensus here, listening to everybody. It sounds like the council wants to look forward, and it may, granted, 5-year CIP could be in 2022, not necessarily 2021, but that's just the document. But you want to accelerate this as fast and as smartly as possible. Okay, if that means jumping ahead a little bit and actually taking some opportunity that might present itself with regard to land acquisition and so forth, looking at that as a way to truncate this? Okay. Question on that, Councilor Gary?
Yeah. Is the bond rate still low, or has it gone up?
Ms. Eastman, bonding, still static?
I haven't done this year's bond yet. It was last year, it was a little higher, but we're just getting ready to do this year's bond. So I'll have a better handle on that in a week or two.
Still under 3%?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if it's advantageous to bond to do a bond project while it's low, then why don't we move forward with it in this next budget?
In the next budget, it could be using, acquisition, the money that we already currently have set aside for building acquisition and demolition to secure land as well without going to bond. So that there's different formulas and
Right,
you don't
but to
necessarily have to
build the
bond this.
building, you need to maybe bond.
Maybe, yes, and there's a mechanism for us to do a bond outside of the CIP. We could do that as a standalone if needed. But again, not sure if that's needed. I don't want to jump 3 steps if it's not needed and confuse the situation, but I think the general consensus here is that we look at acquiring something that makes sense and then come back to us on that property if the opportunity presents itself. So that's the first question. The second question is the taking over the programming by the rec department. Now, I'm not getting consensus here. Do we feel that right now that's okay to look at a structure that keeps the PAL brand, the separate organizational board structure, but brings it under the Parks and Rec from a program management fee or standpoint? Make a consensus on that?
Talking about consensus on evaluating whether or not to do that.
Right, evaluating. We're not making a decision, but we're evaluating any decision on that and creating new departments or adding. I'll have to come back to council. So, but it's worth exploring. You want to look at that org chart and that structure.
And it might be also good to look at the programming that would be the value added with the additional programming too. to
Current
get
and
an idea.
potential? i.e. potential with new building, current with current?
Yeah, current.
Okay, current and potential. Any other feedback on that? It's good feedback. Councilor Gary?
Can the director come and talk to us about what's going on and stuff and what his vision is?
Well, I value the coordinator, and I value what he does. I think that I have no problem having him come in and talk about the programming he was doing prior to and what he would be continuing to do. I think when we talk about vision, I think that should be here at this level. He's a paid part-time employee, but does a great job for us. And I'm very happy with the
Sorry, I
position he's in.
misunderstood. I thought you said he was the director. I mean, somebody was
He's
the
the coordinator.
director.
He's the PAL coordinator. The director would be Sabrina Best. She's the director of rec, but we have a PAL coordinator who is a part-time employee. Great. I'll have him come in, talk about our programming we're running. But when it comes to facility growth, I really think that should be here at the council level.
I certainly think it fits the strategic plan and what we're looking to do as a city going forward, so I think it makes sense.
I think we have consensus on that, evaluating the structure, as well as aggressively pursuing smart land acquisition. Of course, everything have to come back. This is just a workshop, so we're just trying to see if we should move forward. Okay, directional only. Great. I think we're good.
Good.
Any last parting thoughts on that? No? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, Phil. We're going to move on. Next on the agenda is our city fee schedule. We have the Assistant City Manager, Brian Wood, presenting along with Eric Cousins and Jill Eastman, or is it Justin? Jill? Justin too? No? No?
Just Jill.
Jill, you're on here. You're presenting.
She can chime in right from there. So.
Good, right? Yeah.
Justin's more than likely to come. Good
Brian's
evening.
standing over there.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much. So before you is something that I think you guys have seen in some form or fashion a few years ago. In 2017, a version of this was brought before Council, looking at the proposed permitting and fee schedule adjustments. So just a little bit of background. The fees and permits have not been adjusted in approximately 7 years by and large. And so as we know, we've seen a tremendous amount of growth and activity here in Auburn, which we're very excited about. And with that comes a level of effort from the city in terms of making sure that all all permits associated with buildings, going out and doing inspections, all of these things are done up to code and logged. And with that is obviously a cost. And so what we're looking at here are 3 different buckets, if you will, of areas where we think that there is an opportunity to streamline, adjust, and make sure that we're placing the right amount of cost and burden in the right places. So with that, we'll kind of jump in to the delegated review, which, if you want to scroll down. So the City of Auburn, with about 5 or 6 other cities or counties across Maine, have been granted delegated authority to issue permits on behalf of the state. The cost of those permits ranges rather widely, but the City of Auburn has leveled all of those costs at approximately $1,000. And so what we're proposing here is still the opportunity to provide the service to developers, but at significantly reduced rate, but one that more accurately reflects the cost to the city. So you'll see a couple of different options and some projects associated with those options that have taken place in the past, and the variance between what we charged as a city, what the cost would have been if these developers and projects had moved through the state, and what we're proposing as alternatives moving forward. And so as you can see, the state fee is significantly higher than what we charged here at Auburn. And just for comparison, these permits typically take anywhere from 4 to 6 months for developers if they go through the state, whereas our process typically takes 30 to 60 days, which is obviously a significant savings. Time is money. And so what we're looking at here is two different options. One that we are really looking forward to pursuing is a 75% reduction in cost to developers, but still accurately adjusts for the cost of the city. So one thing that I did that I think, just to kind of put it in perspective, even with a 75% discount, looking at the 6 projects that we have here before us, there's still a variance and an opportunity for the city to have captured another $6,769 here that I think would have absolutely gone towards offsetting some of the costs that we paid in our general fund towards permitting and code. So that's one of the things I think we really want to focus on and bring before the council. And Eric, if there's anywhere else you want to jump in, and I'd be happy to take questions on this section or keep going.
Let's start for some questions here, because I think this is an important thing, or a segue, if you could. Councilor Zania?
Thank you, Mr. Wood. So just 2 quick things. One, overall effect on growth. Do we feel, I mean, it's not an exorbitant amount of money, but it is a higher fee, just to comment on that. And then the other thing is differentiating by type of building. I think we saw earlier with a barn being built that the permitting fee was less because there was less inspection that was involved. So does that also come into play here?
Sure. And I'll look to Eric, but I would say we don't believe that there would be a tremendous impact at all in terms of development. Obviously, we always want to be cautious and careful when looking at raising any cost, but because there's such a sizable gap, because we want to make sure that we're not offloading the cost of development onto the current taxpayers, we don't believe that this would be a hindrance. And to your other question, I think it also depends on which specific areas are being triggered. And if you turn to the next page, whether it's traffic or stormwater, I think those various permits are where the various costs are associated. And Eric?
I think the barn didn't require any of these delegated state reviews. That was purely a building permit and site plan review locally. These delegated reviews are really projects that are generally they're larger than 3 acres of impervious area. You can trigger stormwater and traffic without that, but when you get to site law, it's 3 acres or more of impervious area, or more than 20 acres and more than 10 lots for a residential subdivision. So they're really the larger projects that would trigger that permitting throughout the state, regardless if they were in Auburn.
Thank you.
Councilor Mills?
I'm assuming that these projects that you have here as an example the city incurred more than $6,000 worth of expenses to service these projects? Would that be?
It varies somewhat. We charge the flat $1,000 fee, whether they need stormwater, site law, traffic, or all 3. It's $1,000.
Yeah.
On a larger project where we issue more than one type of delegated permit, we do typically probably spend a little more than what we collect in revenue. If it's a real simple one that just triggers one permit, maybe they covered that cost.
So in general, would you say our permitting charges cover the costs or don't cover the cost of staff time today?
So we still overall, as a department, require some input from the regular taxpayer to cover our overall costs. So this would be a way to try to, Brian and I talked a lot about this. The goal is to not be a deterrent to development, but to make sure the single-family homeowner isn't subsidizing our permitting. And right now, I think they still do to some extent.
Okay, that answers it.
Any other questions? I will say,
just-
oh, yes.
I'm
Counselor.
sorry. So the difference, the decision between to do 75% as opposed to 50?
Sure, yes, so I think right now those are kind of the two
Okay.
kind of goalposts or bench that we're looking at. And so obviously that's something that's up to council, but just wanted to give a couple of different perspectives to see what those costs would look like.
Great,
You-
thank you.
Which one covers the cost?
You know, yeah, I think there's two things. Covers the cost and what's the ROI for the city here too. So you have certain projects here that are not going to generate any property taxes going forward for the life of that project. CMCC ball fields. Not to say it doesn't have any other intrinsic value to the community, not at all. But with regards to recouping some of that, the cost the city has to go through, I think that makes perfect sense, increasing those fees. But then I think we also have to look at, we can't be, what's that old analogy, cut our nose off to spite our face. There is something to be said, and people talk about Auburn's cost of doing business in the for-profit sector all the time. I hear it everywhere I go in the state, which really makes me feel good. Bangor Savings Bank is a great example. They love the fact that it was quick, it saved them a ton of money on the permitting, but more importantly, it was quick, and time is money. So, and that's a benefit, and people talk. So when I get back to it, it's almost like we can't use this to subsidize something else. It has to cover itself and the true costs, but also can't be disencouraging to entities, development that's going to actually produce annual property taxes. That's where this gets paid out. It should be amortized out over the lifespan, or at least that taken into consideration. So here's a question. Can we have 2 or 3 different fee structures depending upon the corporate structure of the developing entity? i.e. 50% for a nonprofit, because there's no hope for us to recoup straight dollars, not to exceed the actual true cost, mind you, and then 25% or status quo for for-profit business that we know we will recoup cost on amortized property taxes. Does that make sense? In other words, short-term versus long-term. If we know Woodbury Heights, we charge them $1,000, but we could have charged them $1,600, but we know that subdivision is generating excess of, using a number, $75,000 in property taxes annually. That's a smart investment on our end. And not to say that these developers are going to nickel and dime and say $500 delta is going to make or break a project. That's not the case, but I think it's principle too. So that's a question. Can we have 2 separate fees for 2 separate organizational structures? Counselor.
Yeah, I don't know that I would like to have 2 separate fees depending on the structure.
Can we answer can we
Okay.
have that?
I think that's something we would have to look into. I think we would have to assess what our ability is of, let's say, charging or looking at cost for, say, a church versus another entity and what the implications of that would be. I wouldn't want to misspeak here, but I think that's something that we could look into, and then what the potential level of effort would be from staff time, just kind of coordinating and making sure that I'm reconciling, and then kind of costing out what that would look like, what projected costs would look like as well, and potential revenue. So I think there's something to explore. I think we would definitely want to dive into that a little bit more.
So is that something that people are worth exploring a little? 2 different fee structures depending upon the profit status or the corporate status of the operation.
I would rather, like Councilor Milks, look to see what the actual cost is to start with, to see if we're closer to 75 or 50% before we go down a different fee
25 or
structure.
50?
20, yeah, sorry.
Or currently 1,000?
Right.
I mean, I'd be interested to know, and if this is too hard to do, but have a cost per project. I don't want a revenue-generating activity out of the permitting, but I also don't want a tax-subsidized project.
So you're basically looking at staff doing a scope of work analysis prior to coming back with a quote? And an initial range? An initial range is something, I mean, if someone's exploring without going through the SOW process, you kind of want a range of 1,000 to 3,000, let's say. It's going to fall somewhere in there. That's a concept. I'm not sure if staff can incorporate that in their process flow. I don't know if that's worth debating more, and that is an extra step.
We don't track our time to that level. And there's a lot of overlap between while we're already doing the project review with the planning board, we're overlapping the state delegated permit with that. So we're doing 3/4 of what it takes to process the state permit, even when they don't need a state permit, just to go through the normal planning board process. We add some notification requirements and a few extra reviews, but it doesn't add a great deal of work to a project if it's already going to planning board, if we tag along the delegated review.
Well, hold on, you said you add some steps that the state does not require.
We add some steps to our local review to meet the state's requirements.
Okay, so you're adding steps to meet the state requirement. I just thought I heard that we were adding steps that aren't needed or necessary.
No.
Key in on that, we're all looking for that. Okay, Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's great that you're looking at the prospect of lowering fees, but if we're going to give a deal to our developers, we sure as heck had better give it for our homeowners and small vendor type, mom and pop homeowners that may have wanted to do some sort of renovation or adds on, but they can't because they have to, it's too much money to get from the bank to pay all the fees.
I think we're talking about commercial developments, larger developments of PUDs. This conversation's not yet driving down into the individual building fees or permitting fees for mom and pop to do a porch.
Yeah, so that will be the next phase of this conversation.
Okay,
So
so they're separate. So delegated duties and responsibilities from the state versus what we charge for adding 4 outlets into a home.
Back when this was done, we already had a lot lower fees on a lot of different things. And we ended up raising our fees so that we would be as much as Lewiston. So if we do this, does this mean now we'll fall below Lewiston's fees?
that will fall below Lewiston's fees? No, I believe, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have the lowest, if not one of the lowest, current costs for delegated authority in the state right now.
And to be honest, I'm not worried about Lewiston. I'm worried about Portland, Westbrook, Biddeford, Cumberland, Falmouth. I'm worried about the greater Portland area, which we're part of. Those are the people we're competing against. And we are competing against them. And there's certain things that are happening in those communities that are going to positively or negatively affect what happens in Auburn. Lewiston, frankly, doesn't affect us in a negative way or a positive way. We're not competing really with them. But to this point, if I put my developer hat on, you want to pay, to Councilor Milk's point, you want to pay something that's accurate. You don't want to pay it inflated or an arbitrary number. And load balancing is a thing. I mean, the $1,000 fee, seems arbitrary, but is low. I think looking at this as a 25% fee, just to increase it a little, might make sense. It's also a huge feature or benefit for the city to advertise that we're 75% lower, and then a cost comparison with all the other municipalities, because that's still a benefit, and we can maintain this without having the homeowners subsidize it. And I think that's smart to do. I think it's worth it. At the end of the day, we're only looking at a difference here of $15,000 to $20,000 annually, all in, on the commercial side, if that. I mean, we're looking at 2017 data. It's a little aged, and it's a sample. I mean, what's the total amount of monies that we're looking at right now from an operations side?
For these project examples, it was $6,000 at the $1,000 fee, and it would have been a little over $12,000 had we adjusted the fees too.
So that's not just a sample from 2017? That is 2017?
That are the projects that we use delegated review for in 2017.
Okay. So this delta is pretty minimal on the grand scheme.
And I think there's a lot of value in saying we're offering your permit at 75% off of what you're going to pay throughout most of the state instead of a flat dollar amount.
Councilor Boss?
That shows that that is covering the cost, though. That 25 still seems a little bit just pulled out of the air to me.
Yeah, I mean, we could track a couple of projects, the next couple of projects, and give you an actual comparison. They vary a lot depending on how well put together the application is, whether or not we have all the information up front. But we could do the next couple of projects and truly track that time. And basically sum all of the fees for that project going through planning board and delegated review authority.
I thought you said
The actual figures, and to your point, Counselor Milks to actually have that balance where we're not subsidizing and we're not generating revenue. And I also agree with Counselor McLeod that I think that we should not have a separate fee structure for the category of organization, because then we're incentivizing or disincentivizing different types of organizations from developing, which we don't want to do.
Yeah, that's what we do all the time. That's what the city does.
Let's not do it again.
Done it for 200 years. Well, they also have to, it's not about incentivizing or de-incentivizing, where you're looking at like where you're going to amortize your cost and where your return on investment is going to be. That's what I was getting at. It wasn't about incentive or non-incentive. This is about the reality of certain organizations do not pay any property tax but use service. So,
How many of these are we getting?
I have no idea.
4.
A lot. I think this is
Take
it.
one.
Yeah, one of each. So let's do this. Can we draft up a revised order or an order with the revised fees at 25%? Let's look at this. And when you do draft this order, let's put a 1-year mandatory review, okay, upon execution. Give it 13 or 14 months. That way we can look at a trailing 12, if you would, and see what the actual impact is. We'll do a sample size, look at what the true costs are. We can reevaluate in 14 months.
If we advertised 75% off or 67% off, because we find out it's actually, our costs are actually 33%, it's still a good pitch.
You know, honesty is the best policy, and if you're honest with developers and you tell them, this is really what it costs, people understand that. So, you know, okay, very good, council. We're there, we can move on. Let's move on to the next portion.
We'll probably put the language so that you review it again in November, because we want to make sure that's completed by this council without putting anything
Fair
that
enough.
requires for the next board.
Fair enough, yeah. As long as we get like a good trailing 11 or 12, we get a good cycle under our belts. Okay.
Good for you.
Mr. Cousins, Mr. Woods?
All right, so moving on to the next piece is the proposed fee structure comparison chart. And so, Councilor Gary, this gets to your point. So this is broken down between residential properties, commercial properties, and signage. And this is looking at the number of permits issued in 2017, and you'll see an adjusted fee structure for what the cost would have been or would be based on the proposed adjustments for 2020. And again, to remind council that these haven't been changed in 7 years. And so what you can kind of zoom in on at the bottom of each of the, I guess, segmented permit types. For residential, there'd be, while it says a 16% increase, overall, I would definitely note that the variance in terms of dollar amounts is approximately $5,000. And then for the commercial, it's an 11% increase, but a variance or increase of approximately $10,000. And for signage, a cost of approximately $100+. And so again, this is our desire to make sure that we are accurately capturing the cost of doing business and making sure that all taxpayers aren't subsidizing somebody else putting a deck on their home, or from a commercial standpoint, you know, building an additional garage, you know, to accommodate certain vehicles. So again, for questions.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be the first time I get to ask you some questions, Assistant City Manager. So let's get this straight. I'm building a deck, and if out of the goodness of my heart, I decide to trot down to your office and pay you the $100 fee, which I ain't gonna say if I did or not, but I didn't.
We would greatly appreciate it, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, but it ain't gonna happen. This is why, because people aren't doing the fees anyways, and they're trying to sneak around it and hope they don't get busted during the next tax reassessment, because they fundamentally feel it's unfair. Here's the unfair part. If I build a deck and I pay your fee, what's that money go to? Are you the deck inspector? Is the deck inspector gonna inspect my deck to make sure I put a coat of poly on it? Or I put railings? Who's gonna inspect it? Where is that fee going for?
What? Oh, sorry, did you want to?
It is for an inspection.
Yeah.
Most of
They
it's
are
a
going.
permit review and an inspection.
So you're gonna come, how much, so I wanna build a deck, which is probably one of the most, I reviewed it for 3 years now. I review the alterations, specifically alterations as well as new construction. Decks seem to be the most popular, that and roofs and adding windows and such. So I want to build a deck. How much is that going to cost me? Residential, property, one deck. Yeah, nice deck. Call it 200 square feet, 24 by 10, by 8.
Yep.
It's 10 grand.
It goes on size, though, base fee plus square footage,
Right.
accessory structure. So it's a 200 square foot deck
39 bucks?
Is it, yeah,
plus your base.
so 50, yeah,
No,
60.
total.
55 plus
Total,
30.
39.
Total $39.
7 cents times 200.
I'm gonna pay this $39, go down and generate a piece of paperwork that's gonna cost probably $39 to just process. And then someone's gonna come over and inspect my porch and tell me I did a bad job and tell me to fix it. It's just gonna cost me more money.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not getting a permit. So I would probably say, I don't want you to come down and get a permit. This is why. Okay, and I'm not encouraging anyone to break the law. But the fact is, you're generating more costs than it's worth. This is a fundamental problem with permits, okay, and what we're permitting and how we're permitting. If you did it on a dollar basis or a health and safety basis, yes. If you're replacing a window or an electrical outlet, no, because nobody comes down and says, hey, I need a permit to replace 7 electrical outlets on my house. No one in the city. I don't think you've had one in years.
You will
because you're not
actually,
getting
we
permits.
could provide you the permit data that we could compile every month.
We probably should get a survey. Well, no, I look at this, I
You'll see
look at it.
Yeah, it's in there.
rare.
Yeah.
It's rare.
But it's in there. And I think the key is, Mr. Mayor, because I
Yes,
want to make
no,
sure we're
please.
sending a good message out. We want to make sure that our property owners are ensuring that when it comes time for them to sell their home, they look to maybe get a refinance their home. We have decks that need to be built properly, and sometimes they're not, and we'll go out and inspect those later on. I think you will find, and we're going to have Brian come up at some point and talk. When he's looking to sell a home, he's going to much rather have that home, have that deck built properly the first time, rather than now he's trying to tell the owner, you got to scrap this deck because we can't sell it as it is. And so part of that is that we want to make sure we're having safe. Don't just look at one single family. We have to have this across the board. We have people that rent out these homes. We want to make sure that they are safe. We want to be known as a city to have safe homes that people live in, and that they're meeting all these permit requirements. But if you were to take a look, what we're providing right now, I think overall was around 13% increase. If you look at our operational costs in the last 7 years, it has increased probably closer to about 18%.
I wonder what Turner
So
does for all
we're-
their fees.
So that means that shift has happened to the taxpayers and not to those that are making the improvements on their properties.
Wow, simple.
That's how I would
We
leave.
stop on residential, non-commercial, which means renter. No more fees. Unless it's a substantial health and safety add-on, i.e. in addition to a property. But if it's a porch, asphalt shingles, new windows, we don't inspect, we don't permit. Because outlying towns don't, to a certain degree. And a common thing I hear, and maybe this is a bigger conversation, but I, for one, will probably fight tooth and nail to not keep these fees, if anything, roll these fees down, because I believe fundamentally they're an impediment. They're an impediment to growth, or they're an impediment to basically what homeowners in their own home can and should do, and are doing everywhere else in the country. Now, to your point, Mr. Manager, this is fun for me right now, because this is how we're going to get this out in the open. If you're renting it and it's a commercial enterprise, you have to meet absolute health and safety, and I think there should be that demarcation. We need to make sure that if you're in a commercial operation, you are getting inspected and so forth. But on a residential, some of these I think should go. Counselor?
Would we then need to have a rental registration program, though, to know which units are being rented out and to know when a unit moves from being purely residential to being a commercial use, like you're saying, renting it out? We need to know which units are being rented in order to be able to monitor which units are safe.
Well,
We're
from a
talking
banking
about just when you
perspective-
do a code or an upkeep. We're not talking about in general.
Correct, but you're saying that a single-family home, you don't want to have any fees and no regulation, but then people rent
No,
out their
I said-
single-family
no, no,
homes.
Clarify. I didn't say no fees and no regulations. I said we need to redo what we're doing. We need to look at simplifying and coming up with another methodology. Okay, that's clear. It's not about getting rid of them all, like most of our communities in the borderlands of Auburn do. Or they go by the state regs.
And the difference between residential and commercial in a multifamily is 4 or less is considered residential. And over 4 is considered commercial, so there's already a stratification there. But I respectfully agree with the mayor that I don't think you need to have a regulation to make someone build a deck properly.
I think that's incorrect. I've seen one in my neighborhood that was built that's terrifying to look at. I don't think it's necessarily a given that because somebody's building or fixing or adding on, that they're doing it accurately or appropriately.
If I could just clarify, shingles and window replacements, if you're taking a window out, putting the same size replacement window in, those don't require permits. And all of these permit requirements are from the state of Maine. We're just talking about trying to meet their unfunded mandate and hopefully cover the costs of it. We don't get to decide what requires permits and what doesn't because we're using the state building code, and any town over 4,000 has to. We're at a big disadvantage compared to, say, Sumner, who doesn't have to do any of that, but.
Well, why
it's a
does Sumner not have to? I'm sorry, if you couldn't.
Less than 4,000 population.
Yeah.
So you're saying that these are as a result of an unfunded mandate that we have no choice?
The
As
state,
whether or not
we have a choice in the amount of fees, not in what requires a permit and what doesn't require
Okay.
a permit.
That's different.
With the exception of signs. Signs is the only one on this list that is a totally local decision.
Split the city up.
What? Counselor Walker, that had to be funny. I didn't hear anything.
We just split the city up.
Into 4,000.
Into five,
Well, we already got
4,000
New
people
Auburn. We got the
wards.
mayor of New Auburn over here. North Auburn,
We have-
West Auburn. There we
We
go.
have 5 different councilors, right, for 5 wards? We just split it up that way.
The question's moot then, if we have to.
I think the question is moved to the point where you have to have. I think needs to be some look at these fees. This is why people cheat on taxes, is because they believe it's fundamentally wrong. Okay? That's why people cheat on taxes. Or they try to find every loophole they possibly can in order to avoid paying taxes. And that's why they build loopholes in, because they know it's fundamentally unfair. So this is the same thing here, and could you argue that the lower the fee or the lower the threshold, the more acceptance you'd get? If the fee was $10,
Well,
would you get a higher?
So we have a $10 alarm fee.
I know I pay it.
Not everyone does. So we find that even depending on what the amount is, that doesn't necessarily drive that. It's only a $5 renewal. And we still don't have people that comply. So, I think the question, I think what you have to look at is, are you looking to capture, we could eliminate all fees if that's what the council is looking for. The requirement is just that we do the inspection. So we could go out and do the inspections and not capture anything. Now we need to have people that would actually fill out, still submit it because it's at 0 cost, right? Still submit it. We'd still need that. We still wouldn't have full compliance, but we could go that route. But then the question would be, do you want a taxpayer who is not doing any improvements to their home offsetting a cost for someone who is improving their home in one way or another? That's what you have. That's really where your debate is, not on whether or not we do the inspection, but whether or not, what would the cost be? Because that will determine it. So we're trying to align the cost with the growth from just regular growth that takes place with salary increases and some of the costs for operating the code inspector's department. Do you want that to continue with your fees, or do you want that to continue being a flat fee? We can continue doing that. It's just going to be offset in your general fund expenses.
Mr. Mayor, question or comment, I guess. One of the problems I see out there talking with a lot of people, they don't mind the small fee they're paying. What they mind is when you come back around and revalue the house for what it's worth because you put a wrapped around porch on it. That's where the city gets you. The $15 or the $30 means absolutely nothing to most people. It's that addition year after year after year that you keep getting taxed and keep getting it shoved right where. So you pay it in a lot of different ways. It isn't a one-time fee. That's not what you're paying.
Well, I think that gets to something, and I hear that a lot, and I actually don't know what the truth level is on that one, because we do have neighborhood reassessments with proper notification. We've gone through that around Taylor Pond right now, and it's only after certain MLS data, sales data, raises. Now, I don't think we're spot reassessing areas. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure if I'm not sure if tax assessing is seeing the list of permitting and then going 3 months later and saying, okay, yeah, you got a new wraparound porch, we're going to increase your taxes.
Value of your home goes up, you're going to pay more taxes.
But when do they value that, though? It should be by neighborhood, by zone, and that is something I think we definitely need some clarity on.
I think you're going to find the value will come out within a year, because they're going to ask you how much it costs you to build. It might be a garage you want to build. That's a $30,000 increased piece of property that you've got standing there now. That means you pay more taxes next year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they get all the permits from planning and permitting, the assessors do.
And so
they
they're
go out-
readjusting value on those?
They go out and inspect them every
I
year.
will, and just one other piece of information I think that's helpful for the context of this conversation is that if you look at the trend over the past 6 or 7 years, the number of permits that have been issued overall has been trending upward, indicating that not only is it not, it's in line with the growth of the city, I would say. And so I think it's something that, again, regardless of the cost, the notion that something has been approved and looked at and is deemed safe is something that is a value add.
Council, do you feel comfortable with some sort of conclusion at this point, or do you want to keep talking about this, or part of this conversation? Yes. We already talked about the commercial permitting fees to look at the 25% mark with the expiration of November. Do we want to address residential permitting fees at this time? Or do you want more information on this?
I think, Mr. Manager, excuse me if I'm wrong, you said that you have a lot of data. This has been a qualitative conversation, but we need to see data on permitting. I think that would be really helpful from my perspective.
We get it every month. I think we just got one today from Rhonda.
That's
Or
great.
say we-
I think we should look at it as a council, because you're saying that people don't do permitting because it's not worth it and they think it's intrinsically unfair, but I'm hearing from others, from staff, that people are permitting. So I'd like to look at that.
Nobody knows how many people aren't. That's hence the
Well,
problem.
that'll be the issue. We don't know how many aren't, but as a member of the planning board, I know that Rhonda sent that information out to me all the time. I know because it took up a lot of space with the people that were doing the permitting. So I would like to see information, because we talk about the values of homes going up. Well, they are going up. We see it in the newspapers all the time. My house used to be worth X, now it's worth 2X or something. So, from a city standpoint, we're looking at taking that money in taxes to be able to pay for the services we're offering people. If we don't take any money in, we're begging on the street for money to provide services. So I would like to see more information on it.
So if we could, I want to make sure our staff has the right direction that you're looking for. If you're looking for more information, are you looking for amount of permits? Are you looking for by category? Because we'll have electrical, we'll have plumbing, we'll have, probably about, Eric, what would you say, 6 different categories?
7.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Can we get maybe a cumulative? Let's look at a case study. So if we have a bundle down, what's your average, I'm going to throw something out here, average sewer permitting fees for 2018 or 2020 year to date? And then what is the average time necessary and cost to process that permit, internal, administrative cost? Okay, second, to actually go and inspect the property. And what is the inspection accuracy? In other words, or efficacy? Out of 100 permits pulled for, sewer, are 100 being inspected? What is our compliance rate? I think those two numbers, and please pipe in here anytime, council. I'm just trying to consolidate this, would be beneficial to look at what the true cost versus the true cost of providing the service and what the homeowners are paying.
So 2 things, I think. One, let's make sure that the staff has capacity to do this. And the second thing is, I think Mr. Cousins said that you're not able to actually parse it down to that specific to say, to do a sewer, it costs us this much money in staff time to go out and do this inspection. So it might be difficult to get the numbers where you want them. Is that true?
Yes, and I think it's difficult, like, I spent a little bit of time with Counselor Milks to talk about a property that he had and the development potential on it. That time will never be tracked to the permit that he pulls to develop that parcel a year from now or 2 years from now. There's a lot of the service that we provide to people before they even buy a property to see what they can do. They may look at 3 or 4 different properties, so that's all time that has to be paid for somehow.
Well, I think that's separate. I mean, that's absolutely warranted now, whether it's tax dollars because it's general economic development, because you're prospecting and looking at a potential scope of work, consultative. And for every 3 of those you do, maybe only one project goes. But I'm talking about from the time John Smith comes and says, I am adding a wraparound porch, here are the dimensions, here's what it looks like, here's my application form. That, pulling it in, how much time does it take to actually look at it, certify it, move it through the admin process, and then what time is going out to actually do the inspection, including travel. And that's, you want to pull a statistically relevant sample size and just ballpark it with a margin of error of 5% on either side, just so we have an idea, okay? Because I think that's key. We're looking at the variable here is we need to cover staff's time. Great. Okay, understandable. We don't want it to be subsidized by taxpayers who are not doing anything. Understandable. But to what level are we doing that? You know, and I'm sure Councilor Boss has no problem subsidizing that permit as long as her neighbor's porch that she gets to look at looks good, right? So she wants to pay for that, and maybe that's an option. Make sure your neighbors see that. But I think that's what we're trying to get to, is really what that ballpark is. It's just a statistically relevant sample size of cost versus revenue.
So we can try to work on that. I think when we look at the data that we're collecting currently on permits, we'll be able to break it down by category, whether it's a single-family dwelling, commercial, residential. We'll be able to break out that, whether it's plumbing, electrical. We can probably break out some of what the average pulled permit would be. I think that's one thing you said, Council Lasagna, for like a residential. If we're pulling an electrical permit, what's the average amount for that? So I think based on the data that we currently collect, we could probably pull that. We've got years' worth of data collecting the same information. That I'm pretty certain we can provide that for you. It's like Eric said, we can get you a standard cost. If there was no wrinkles, there was nothing taking place, and it didn't require 4 inspections for 1 deck. Because sometimes that happens.
Or 4 conversations before it even happens.
Yeah, if we just look at a basic, if there was nothing that took place, this is just what we're looking for. Once they apply and be able to figure out what the cost would be for a staff member to do the review, to go out and do an inspection, we could try to give you an average number on that. And then we can give you some average numbers on the inspections. That's going to take a little bit of time. And so we'll need to dig into that. We can bring that piece. One thing that we can do is, from what I'm hearing, we've got 3, I think Brian mentioned there's 3 different sections here, or 4 actually. We can bring these before you. They don't have to come all together. So if we have one that's ready, we're going to bring that forward. We'll move on that. And then what we might end up doing is this one that we're talking about right now might be a little delayed. But I think the administrative fees that I think is next, and I'm just trying to move because of time, I think those are pretty basic, straightforward, and we can probably jump to that. I think we have enough information. This is going to have to come back before you. So we'll do that. I think we've got what we need. If there's anything that we missed, make sure you let us know. But then, Brian, do you want to jump to
Sure.
the next section?
Yes, and so the next and final section are overall fees. And these are one of the biggest areas that we made a change to, in addition to scaling things down and adjusting things appropriately, is the administrative fee. And so you will see here a number of fees that had previously, sorry, is that the administrative section? Okay, yep. That had previously been left out that we are currently adding in. And there are approximately 7 pages of different changes to a number of different fees, whether that be striking them completely, amending fees to more appropriately align with 2020 costs or removing them altogether. So I don't know if everybody had an opportunity to review these, but some of the highlights are obviously the administrative costs associated in Section 1. You'll see on page 4 a elimination of the taxi cab fees. You will see
Nursing homes?
nursing homes, yes, as well as jukeboxes are being eliminated. You will also see reinspection fees, which I think we can wrap up in the previously mentioned conversations. So this is kind of a comprehensive analysis of a number of city fees as well as fees that were discussed in previous communications.
Wasn't there a song about Guns N' Roses, fees, fees? Everywhere I look, I see fees, or is it signs? Similar, right?
But elimination as well, Mr. Mayor.
5, 6? Jukebox, coin-operated amusement, nursing home license fees, online issuance and fees. I'm going to throw this out there for the council. And yeah, this is something I've looked at, and mind you, I went through this before our city manager was city manager with our past city manager on the fact that you can look at things as fees to cover cost, but the simplification of the concept of fees, not necessarily the decrease in the amount of fees, goes a long way to what the overall package looks like. And the package here is Auburn. Could there be is it possible under state guidelines to merge some of these sections? I'm just going to randomly pull one of these out, right? Off-premise retailer, up to 3,000, from 3 to 6, 6 and plus. We're talking about a $50 delta per. Can we just say small retailer, large retailer, and eliminate one? Can we do the same thing when we're looking at the horsepower of a motor for a sub pump? 5 horse versus 10 horse. They're different fees.
We can certainly continue to look at that. I think one area, and I'm not seeing it right now, but I know we merged fees for the cemetery rather than having a single and family plot. It's just one cost associated. So we can continue down that path for all of these, if that's the direction the
We'll
council
open it
would
up to
like
the
to go.
council. I mean, the council, you have the modernization of fees or the increasing of fees to take into consideration inflation and true cost. That's one aspect. The other aspect is really looking at what is there a way to make the package more attractable and understandable if the fee schedule instead of 7 pages was truly 3? And could we have the same financial benefit to both the fee issuer, the City of Auburn, and the applicant? Council, thoughts?
Well, it looks like they've removed a number to begin with, but certainly going through one more time or another time. They've been doing work on this already.
And I think if you look at it, I mean, you're looking at a consolidation as well as elimination of line items. And there's some reasons for everything, not to bemoan any reason or distinguish yard sale fees. Everybody talks about, why do we have to do a yard sale fee? Well, actually, there's a significant justification for that to prevent the ability for an individual to have a permanent yard sale. There's a value, okay? But consolidating fees between segments based upon size and normalizing the price points might make sense as well. And again, I've gone through this already. And in business, when you're a vendor and you're making your proposal to a client, this is usually called the nickel-dime experience. And even though everything is justifiable, the overall takeaway from the person who you're doing a proposal to is that you're really just looking out for your bottom line and not theirs. It turns off potential developers, turns off potential clients. It's something, if we can distinguish ourselves from other municipalities that are all like this, by having a simplified fee structure, okay, more consolidated, shorter, that really shows a difference. That's a business point of view.
I mean, on the other side of the same coin, I'm looking at mobile or itinerant vendor permit. There's a range from 30 days to 1 year, and I would feel nickel and dimed if I was only going to be using, this for 30 days, and it's the same exact fee for a whole year. So I feel like there's, the alternate perspective with reducing the number of categories as well.
Or maybe even eliminating, because let's say mobile vendors is a great example. The state of Maine has a mobile vendor inspection process. If that mobile vendor actually gets inspected by the state of Maine for health and safety and can go anywhere, but they come to Auburn, they have to pay another fee, another permitting fee for another inspection. It's a duplicate fee for the same exact service. So maybe we ask ourselves that if you want to come to the city of Auburn, you have to make sure you're in a compliant zone, which is less than 200 feet away from a brick and mortar establishment. Don't quote me on that. But you also have a state fee. If you want to be here for more than 30 days, then you'll have to pay a fee. So then all of a sudden you're getting more of those, I love that example by the way, more mobile food vendors coming to Auburn for events. We had this problem with New Year's Eve Auburn and with other events throughout the year, attracting food vendors from Portland and Brunswick because they didn't want to come here for 2 or 3 days. And they're like, but I've got a state license, I've got 3 other municipality licenses too, that's stupid. Now I have to get a 4th one for 2 days, I'm not sure if I like the crowd. So are we redundant in certain licenses? Your example? Absolutely we are.
To see a list of those redundancies, because I know for food preservation and value added, it's the same thing. There's a state fee and then there's a local fee. So I think that we are disincentivizing some activities, and it'd be nice to see what those are.
Would be. That's the only one that really pops up. That's the only one I looked at, though, from a state standpoint. But I'm glad you said it. But yeah, you're right. I'm sure there's a lot more inspections and fees that we do that are already done at the state level that don't need to be done here. Or we have to look at reciprocity. If the Lewiston health inspection happens, would that be transferable to Auburn, if as long as it's valid, or Brunswick or Portland? Reciprocity, does that help? Because then it's just a stamp approval versus an actual inspection. So, feedback? I do have to open this meeting up. It's 7:06, we're going, and we can keep this conversation going and lead right into housing. But unless there's some parting thoughts, or unless you want to close this up now, move into the next topic.
I think we have enough information to come back to you with the administrative piece. We'll work through that, and, but like I said, we'll probably see that first phase right back to you real soon.
Fair enough? Okay. I'm going to declare this workshop in recess. We're going to take a 5-minute break, come back for our next agenda item, which is a follow-up conversation on housing and form-based coding. So 5 minutes, and we'll bring back the meeting. Not to be announced.
I could go for some right now.
I got it written down. And I want to remember to talk to him.
I'd like to call to order this this meeting for October 5th, 2020. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you very much. What we're going to do is we're going to do a continuation of our last workshop item. I've got Mr. Cousins and Mr. Poirier. Poirier, good. Justin, on board to talk about form-based coding. This is a continuation of our last meeting workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. When we spoke 2 weeks ago, Justin was already working on alternatives and a plan for how we could update certain areas of the downtown with a form-based code. We now have more information, and I think he has a plan that is much more efficient and gets at your goals much faster than what I had proposed, so he's going to tell you about that tonight.
So good evening. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go through so you can see how this storybook application works. This is going to be posted publicly if it's not already, so anybody can go in and look at this after the fact if you want to see the detail of the work that we went out and did. So the basic idea was that we would expand the traditional downtown form-based code neighborhood into some of the other more densely populated residential neighborhoods that already exist. So since we already have all of the requirements for this zone already in the zoning, it's basically just expanding it on the map, so we don't have to go through the time and expense of basically designing a new zone from the ground up, which includes all the setbacks, the styles, and all that. We think that this applies pretty well to these other areas that I'm going to show you in a minute. So the basic characteristics of this code is more public and private realm interaction, meaning that the front of the buildings are up on the sidewalks, where when people are walking by, you can see your neighbors on their porches, things like that. Small front yards, bay windows, neighborhood scaled storefronts, fences, street trees, and moderate densities. So these pictures are some examples of what we would be looking for in this expanded zone. So what I did was I went around some of these neighborhoods and I took pictures. So you can go around, you'll see as I highlight over a certain one, it'll show on the map where that is. And you can go in and you see what that neighborhood looks like. So people can get a feel for how these neighborhoods currently interact and whether they think that they fit to those pictures I showed earlier, which is what we're trying to get to with the form-based code. So I went through the city and I took a bunch of pictures of different areas. So this is New Auburn, obviously. I won't go through all these pictures because you can look these up online yourself. But just some examples. There's a consistent theme here. These are all single family or they're multifamily, 2-3 stories. There's a few that are outside of that. There's a few that are 4 stories down in New Auburn, for example, but that's already not in compliance with the zoning. It can exist, but you couldn't build that today if you went in there. So those are already non-conforming uses. So we would recommend that we apply the same zone to the Newberry Street neighborhood. It seems pretty consistent that we're looking basically at the same style buildings with porches on the front, multi-unit. The homes are very close to the street on the sidewalks. The downtown enterprise zone right now has expanded uses that the multifamily urban zone doesn't necessarily not allow, but you have to go through the review process with the planning board, and there are things that you can do in the downtown enterprise zone that don't require special exception uses. Those special exception uses would also not be required if we expanded the form-based code. So basically those same things that are allowed in the downtown enterprise zone without a special exception would also now be allowed in the new form-based code expansion areas. Again, we're looking at similar idea, moderate density, street trees, homes up on the sidewalk, porches, fences. This is all pretty consistent, appears to be when you walk around the city. The last area is the multifamily urban area that is in the Turner, Goff Street, Hampshire Street area, with the exception that we would have the planning board review about whether they should turn that park strip in the middle into conservation zone. Right now, it's just part of the multifamily urban area. The city owns all that area up through there. And again, in this neighborhood, we're looking at very similar type neighborhoods. Porches up on the street, sidewalks, moderate density. In some places, there are street trees. Some places, there are not. Other than that, I think I would leave it at that unless Eric wants to say anything else. But we'll have this tool on the website, so you can go through and look in more detail at each individual area and see if you agree or disagree. But basically, tonight, we're just looking to see if the council would like to have the planning board review this and come back with a recommendation at a later date. The maps in front of you are showing the expanded areas. For example, if we're looking at the new Auburn area, there's a spot that's still general business. We only left that like that because our business is sitting there right now, but the idea was that we would expand the residential form-based code across Riverside Drive, because those are all homes in that area, and the lot sizes are small, and it just doesn't seem likely that it's going to turn into businesses anytime soon, and a lot of those homes are well taken care of, so I wouldn't see them necessarily being replaced. But those types of details are things the planning board can work through and come up with a recommendation for you.
Do you have a master list of, when we're expanding this, what kind of changes, what kind of positive outcomes this could produce? In other words, you said a couple times that we couldn't replace some of the existing buildings if they burnt down or were demolished within the non-form-based code zones because they didn't meet requirements?
They would continue not to meet. Those four-story buildings would continue to be non-conforming. They're non-conforming now, and they would continue to be under the form-based code. It's just not the size that the form-based code envisions for those areas.
It's just not the size.
It's too tall. There's too many stories.
So
Like form-based code right now has a three-story and an attic limit in the traditional downtown neighborhood. So most of the buildings that are in the multifamily urban will be in compliance because most of them are either 2 stories and an attic or they're 3 stories now.
I think one of the biggest differences is right now we require a 25-foot front setback. And I think that's a problem because if you meet a 25-foot front setback, you really don't meet the character of the neighborhood you're building in. So the form-based code would correct that, and you can really see, looking at these aerials, most of the buildings are currently non-conforming, and they would become conforming under the form-based code, and their neighbors could build consistently with that. One of the biggest changes would be outside of the downtown enterprise zone that sits right here behind City Hall, in the Union Street neighborhood, New Auburn, and Laurel, there would be some small flexibilities opened up for businesses, and I think that's a big part of what would need to be decided if that's appropriate. It's already allowed in the downtown enterprise, but it would be expanded to Turner Street neighborhood in that area, and I think that would have to be given some thought. But the structural standards of this district really match the neighborhoods as far as the building placements.
And I want to hark back to a lot of the same themes that the council said: downtown density, infill, promotion of, well, you address it with the curb and the setback of the sidewalks, but the side parking requirements. How do we really maximize the value and the density per acre in these downtown areas? And I'm not an expert on this. I want to research it more, of course. I'd love the planning board to have some of those themes and really make sure that, this move does accomplish what some of the goals were that the council has talked about over the last year. So, council, any thoughts on that? Councilor?
Just a quick one, you did mention about businesses mixed use, right? And that's built into this in certain areas of this? Or across the zones?
In the multi-family urban, you are allowed to put some business uses in, but they're special exception uses in the downtown enterprise zone, and if it was to go to form-based code, it would be permitted.
Okay, thank you.
Are we saying out here in the parking lot in front of the parking garage, we wouldn't go over 3 stories?
We are not, City Hall is not in this same zone, so there are different rules for along Court Street. That's a different form-based code zone.
How about right here, Main Street, next to the roadblock? There's a brick house, and there's an open-in space that we own. Would that be only 3-story?
Right now, 2 plus an attic. We could have the planning board consider changing that again as part of this discussion. They already recommended that we extend the district to allow taller buildings on that lot, but the council chose not to pass that.
Yeah, it was about 3 years ago. I think it's looking at the new economic environment, plus the council's charge to have a commercially viable downtown, considering and overlaying the cost of development. If the planning board can give an updated recommendation on that, I think that would be beneficial. Just because I've talked to 3 developers now about that, and it's just the cost of keeping it at that height negates the entire project.
That's right. It's not feasible.
One other form-based code requirement that we've kind of talked about around the office, some places have done it, is you try to find a spot on the earth where it makes sense to draw a line. But whether that line is one property to the north or one property to the south, you can't see that line driving down the street. And one other flexibility might be to allow a district to extend one lot beyond its physically drawn boundary. So the property owner would have flexibility on that line.
For example, the one you see up there, you see how it just goes up the street, and then just at some point, we drew a line. It doesn't necessarily mean that the next house in the yellow zone is that much different, but you have to put a line somewhere. So just that kind of.
So fuzzy line.
Yeah.
Yeah, little fuzzy line, little movability. Council, is there anything else that we want to add to this, or, I mean, is this something that we want to go through? A, does it simplify the process? B, does it help increase and spur downtown revitalization of existing properties? And C, does it incentivize building of new properties on otherwise vacant, non-revenue generating lots? I think those are the 3 questions that we need to ask. And then overarching is, does it, make the quality of life in Auburn better for the residents in that specific location and in general throughout the entire city? So that's how I kind of look through it. And that's what the council keeps talking about. And I just want to make sure that, we keep focus of what your goals are. Okay, great.
Do you want to see again, or do you want us to bring it to the planning board, come back with a recommendation?
Planning board, folks? Planning board first, back to council?
Question, I'm looking at this map, this is Summer Street, Winter Street, correct? Why do we not just make that whole section with all the houses that are the same? Because there's a natural geographical, there's a woods up above there. Make that whole section just one thing.
At some point, somebody walked that neighborhood and said they thought the character changed at that particular spot. The planning board would draw these lines.
We certainly can, and we could look at that with the
Because we
planning
look
board
at
on why those
Whitney
lines.
and Outer Summer, Whitney, I mean, you get to a point and it's actually geographically, it turns into woods.
You can see it at the top of the screen, essentially, is where
Yeah.
it changes.
If we just made, because those are all like houses down in there.
At some point, they decided that beyond that was more 1 and 2 family than multi, and they kept it as
So let's,
urban residents.
you want to add that, council, to the list for planning board, since we're reviewing this as well, reviewing the line? Okay. Again, I don't think it's going to be a drastic change. Comp plan review's coming up. That's talking about land usage, but right now, this is still, in that same utilization use and geographically contiguous. Okay.
We were following the multi-family urban boundaries because we thought that was more or less a slam dunk with the character, and we didn't want to create enough questions that we couldn't make some progress, but we can certainly look
I think
further.
it's great. I love the concept.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Brian Dubois, resident of Auburn. And first of all, I'd like to thank him. He came here around 6 o'clock. But this is, again, timely. Everything we're talking about right now feeds into this. Brian, the city manager and myself wanted to have someone in the real estate industry, a specialist with deep ties to Auburn, who is a resident of Auburn, talk to us a little bit about what the market is doing. We've all seen a lot in the paper. We've talked a lot about this in council and in workshop. And I think it would be great for Brian to come forth and give his perspective. This will be a Q&A after a statement from Brian. I'll let Brian kind of give his perspective and market analysis. And then if we have specific questions, hopefully he has time to answer. It's to you, Brian.
So I have some handouts, Mr. Mayor. How do you want to do this? Can I just pass them around? So again, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not part of my presentation tonight, but having a couple of gentlemen like this on staff, I think is great for our city. Mr. Fifield, Mr. Cousins, outstanding, have this type of caliber at those leadership positions. And in my profession, it's nice to have such great resources. So thank you, gentlemen. We're happy to have you. As Mr. Mayor said, my name is Brian Dubois. I'm with the Dubois Realty Group of Keller Williams Realty. Together with my wife, Marnie, we have a small business. We employ a few people, and we operate out of our office on 195 Center Street here in Auburn. I've born and raised here, spent about 14 years outside of the community with some professional opportunities, graduated from Bentley University, Waltham, Mass. Happy to be back to raise my children. We now reside on Fairview Avenue in Auburn and have been a real estate professional for 8 years now, and ranked number 2 with a small real estate, classified as a small real estate group in the state of Maine. So we're proud of that. What I am not is an environmentalist, an economist, a developer, or a soothsayer. But I was, however, invited tonight to shed some professional opinion on the local market and how my perspective may help you make informed decisions. Some of this information I'll share with you is supported by data, but a lot of it is through client feedback, as well as feedback with others in my profession. So a lot of it may not be documented or sourced, but hopefully it gives you some insight to some frontline feedback, if you will. I was asked to provide a SWOT analysis, so it's down and dirty. That's what's presented to you, is how I see some strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats of the City of Auburn. Thought we'd go through that quickly, and then I can answer any questions you might have. But first, again, from a real estate perspective, what are the strengths of Auburn? Obviously, I think accessibility is a major strength. Proximity to Maine's largest city and business hub. Proximity to the state capital, equidistant, if you will. We have tremendous natural resources here with the river. I can't believe what we've done with the river in my lifetime. It's certainly an improvement, something that we can now showcase where we once wanted to hide. Lake Auburn, Taylor Pond, Mount Appetite, these are all great attractions for our area. Recreational opportunities is certainly a strength. We have Lost Valley and all that they've done out there in the recent years. Tremendous family recreational opportunity there. Wallingford's Apple Orchard. We have golf courses, Norway Savings Bank Arena, Ingersoll turf facilities, and a new baseball softball complex in partnership between the city as well as Babe Ruth. We have some nice breweries in town. These are all very marketable assets to the community. Other things that people perhaps don't think of is Auburn as a gateway to other resources, recreation opportunities, so many to the northwest, within an hour's drive, you have some great opportunities really to see this beautiful state, and it's nice to be at that jumping off point, if you will. City amenities, I'm often asked about the infrastructure. Having 2 hospitals in our area is a great asset. Numerous daycare facilities, convenient food sources, people not required to drive for hours, losing time out of their day. And of course, we have some higher education opportunities with Bates College, USMLA, CMCC, Purdue University, and the like. Weaknesses. People tend to focus on the weaknesses when they're in my office, unfortunately, and one of the major items, as you can imagine, is the tax rate in Auburn. It's a deterrent. It's why many folks may choose a different community, whether it be an outlying town of Auburn or outside the region altogether because of it. Auburn's gateway. We talked about being a gateway to the rest of the state, but driving into Auburn from exit 75, to be honest, it's a very tough sell for Auburn after they've made that trip in town from the Turnpike. And I would say, not to the same degree, but in the similar mindset, they're coming in from Route 136, does not put Auburn in its best light. School performance ranking, whether it's perceived or actual, I've been told that the lower ranking for our school system has a lot to do with the physical aspects of our facilities, which is being addressed. But how many people outside of Auburn are aware of that? They just see the end result, which is not a favorable stat. Demographics, a little bit more complex perhaps, but what percentage of top-tier talent actually reside here? Your top attorneys, your top healthcare professionals, your top management business owners making livings here, but residing elsewhere, residing in the Cumberlands, the Portlands, the Falmouths of the state, I think is a real challenge and a weakness for us. We miss those top-tier influences on our local boards, fundraising efforts, civic groups, and so forth. Another weakness is shops and clothing. You don't have to look past the Auburn Mall of what once was to what is now and see that things have changed. And yet we're seeing people in Augusta, Brunswick, Portland, everyone around us has those types of destinations where Auburn does not. Another weakness, blight and housing conditions. Having been in a number of these properties for the line of work that I'm in, just simply unacceptable, those conditions, and to think that people are living in that day to day, it's just unacceptable, and I think we need to do better. And then I would say a weakness is an identity crisis. You know, what are we? Are we an old mill town, shoe shop town, farming town? Are we a bedroom community to Portland? Are we a getaway from Portland? Are we focused on service and manufacturing? Are we looking for a quaint type feel to our town, or are we looking at sprawling commercial or industrial? What is it that we're looking for? We do have a lot of opportunities, I feel, and obviously the new Edward Little High School is a big part of that. There's a saying that if the city were a house, the high school is its front porch. Right now we have a dilapidated old front porch and not great for a very good first impression. Obviously a new school with the amenities that are outlined, I think is going to be a tremendous improvement and a good first impression for our city. Sports tourism, I'll admit that I don't have a ton of knowledge, but it seems to have real momentum. I put that down as an opportunity. Lake Auburn has always surfaced. I'm sure you folks in your role, there's probably not a week that doesn't go by where some type of question isn't raised about developing around Lake Auburn. I would put that down as an opportunity. Blight and condition of the same current housing stock could be an opportunity to provide in-town parking, green space, things that I'm sure you've all thought of before. But the potential for well-built, efficient, attractive replacement properties, I think, is before us. Land, as you know, Auburn has plenty of land. If nothing else, we have land. Honestly, some of it isn't worth much because of its current zoning. And some could be developed to meet the community needs. As you know, there's a significant housing shortage, and I don't necessarily mean affordable housing, but we can get into that later. I also included Lewiston's Canal system as a recreational draw, maybe a tourism draw. It's not in our city, but I think it's certainly an opportunity for the Twin Cities. Threats right now, I believe we're losing the battle between 295 and 95. I think Brunswick, Topsom area is kicking our tail. And I think right now we need to stop the continued exodus. Retaining top professionals is critical to our community. And so we have competition. You know, who is attracting the people we want to attract? How are they doing it? they're going somewhere. Why is it they're going elsewhere, not here? And I think a real threat is around complacency, and the fact that we're talking about this tonight, I think, is a good sign. I want to commend you, Mr. Mayor, and the council. So this is a good first step, but until we do something about it, I think it remains a very real threat to our community. So there's my down and dirty SWOT of Auburn from my perspective, based on my experience as a realtor and things that I hear. I'd love to field some questions.
Any questions for the council?
I think it's a realistic assessment.
Thank you.
From my opinion, I think the Lake Auburn is in the wrong place. I think I think you should have put it back in the weakness. I think that's a weakness because we've been held back for years. Things have been taken away from us for years up there, and it's continual. A lot of people think, well, let them take and buy up all the land around it. That's going to help us. That's just put us behind. You have to live 3 miles up over the hill in order to be able to say you live near a beautiful lake. And I don't believe some beautiful homes with the right septic systems would hurt us a bit out there. But the Water Commission, the water people have put us way behind, and we'll never get back to where we were.
What do you think, as far as Gateway, exit 75, what do you hear would be, what do you think needs to be done out there? Or on Washington Street coming in?
I'm going to try not to be sarcastic, but the first thing that comes to mind is dynamite.
Yeah.
C4 maybe? Yeah.
You know, on the way out of town, it's wooded, it's pleasant this time of year, leaves are changing. The way into town is a disaster. I don't think there's any politically correct way to put it. Fences at a minimum, but I would love to see some type of effort of relocating businesses to a less obvious visual place. And we talk about blight and condition. I mean, some of those buildings, I don't know how they're still standing. I don't pass judgment, but I don't think people desire to live there as so much that they don't have many options. So I think that whole corridor needs to be addressed and it needs our attention.
That's zone business now?
Say again?
Along Washington Street, that's general business zoning, commercial.
If I could, I'd like to ask some questions specifically about housing too, Brian, in your experience. Obviously, we see in general that housing, obviously time of market's decreased, values are going up. What type of houses do you see are in demand? Not necessarily what gets purchased or sold, but what's the want or the demand out there?
I think the low-hanging fruit is, when you look at the demographics, you look at baby boomers paired with first-time home buyers, and they're all looking for the same types of property. Single-floor living, not a tremendous amount of square footage. The baby boomers, and again, I'll talk in general terms, but they're tired of maintaining their larger homes. They want to do things on the weekends. They want it virtually maintenance-free. Single-floor living in case they've just had a hip replacement or they're scheduled one in the next 5 years. So they're looking for those types of properties, not a lot of land to mow. And they're competing with first-time home buyers, in my view, for the same type of home. They've been renting. They're looking for, they're expanding a family. They want and I don't mean a modest home, I mean an efficient, well laid out, well thought out first-time home, but usually it's one-floor living, again, not a sprawling executive ranch, but something that is achievable with a first-time home.
Price range, square footage range on both, if they're, the assumption of them being the same?
Yeah, it's a challenge because, if you talk new builds, you're talking probably over 300. And a lot of these folks don't want to pay over 300 for that type of price, but really I think the sweet spot is 250 and less. Real challenge for developers to provide that price point with today's materials. and the related costs with that.
Do you see an opportunity, we talked about one of the drawbacks, the blight? You know, we've got a downtown area with a lot of pretty nice buildings that are, I mean, is there an opportunity for owner occupied, are you seeing, in that group of?
I suppose there's always an opportunity for owner occupied. That's not the segment of the need that I would address first, if that's part of your question. But certainly, you know, the inventory is tight. At first, it was residential homes, and the multifamilies lagged behind as far as demand, and now that inventory, that stock is dried up pretty well, too. But I would be more inclined, as a young, you know, in my younger days, if I were to be starting a family, I think that's the smart investment, is to start out with an owner occupy and build my equity. But I think our real need is single family, something smart, efficient, attractive, you know, with a nice lot of land.
What about the condominium kind of model? Not only the attached condominiums, but for example, in Lewiston, the Apple Valley, where you have maybe for retirees something a little different, where you don't own the land.
Yeah, I was just in that condominium the other day, and everything that's built is sold. So I think that probably answers your question.
Yeah.
I think the only condos, last I checked, the only condos that were available, I believe, were two-story. But if you were to go into that, again, for the same reasons I mentioned before, I think people want low maintenance. They don't want to spend time doing their yard work, and they could be doing something fun.
Where would we draw the executive people to stay here in Auburn? What area and what kind of housing would they be looking at?
A lot of people like to target by the turnpike. I would argue that our entire city is by the turnpike. Those professionals are going, it's an easy shot to go over the backside of Lake Auburn out Hotel Road and get to the turnpike. You got Route 4. I think we have the infrastructure to get people from any part of Auburn. New Auburn's got those great new developments, higher end housing. And I think it depends on, it's kind of a catch-22, you know, if you, I don't think people are coming here for the highest end homes yet. But I think the younger professionals who have been pushed out of the Portland market, again, fitting into that housing segment that I just talked about, I think that's probably our best opportunity.
So if I, I'm sorry, did you have a question, Councilor Bose?
Just a quick question. So from your perspective, is the right kind of housing enough to draw different populations, or are they looking for better school ratings, or are they looking for the amenities in the shopping malls? I mean, I know that some of that is maybe chicken and the egg, but is housing enough to draw the people that you're mentioning?
It's a start, because the dirty secret is that nobody else has housing either. So if you have the housing, maybe that's the draw. But no, I don't think it's not the one arrow in the quiver type of solution. I think a lot of these issues need to be addressed really to make a difference.
And then also, are you seeing a market for renovation of homes that are lower cost and say in the downtown that can then be marketed for a higher income bracket because there is low housing stock? Like, are you seeing people flipping
Yes,
houses?
people are flipping like crazy, and people are renovating investment properties like they're going out of style. I mean, I don't know of a contractor who isn't out straight. I'd say the delays in any types of renovations are really around the cost of materials at this point, prohibiting any type. But yes, flippers are, there's not enough properties to be flipped right now.
Thanks.
Just to go back to Councilor Milk's question, along Washington Street, most is general business, but then we do have a pretty good section that's industrial, and then a small section that's rural residential. So we do have a combination.
Yeah, it's the inbound is where all the industrial and outbound is where it's pretty.
Yeah, you have general business really on
Roads.
both. Yeah.
Yeah,
Northbounds, yeah. I want to follow up with a couple more questions for Brian, but first I want to answer your question. We pulled some stats today on owner occupied, and I've shared with a couple counselors. Out of a total number of properties, not units, properties, 7,131. With a margin of error about 3% on either side, 6,155 of them are owner occupied. Could be an 8-unit building with 1 unit with the owner living in it, or it could be a single-family home. And it could be a condo that they're snowbirds and they're only up here 5 months and 29 days. They don't qualify for homestead exemption per se, but it's their single-family home. That puts our owner occupied on property at 86%. Rough math on units, so 86% of all buildings in Auburn residential have the owner living in them. Drops down when you look at complete number of units, apartment units and so forth. Home ownership stat is around 65%, gets a little fuzzy. Could be anywhere from 60 to 66, right around there, okay? We're working on kind of pinpointing that, but that gives you a range. So it makes sense. Just want to give you the heads up that owner occupied is fairly high. I was shocked. 2 units, to Brian, your point, there's 692 2-unit buildings within Auburn. 344 are owner occupied, so 50% are owner occupied. And that stat diminishes as the size of the unit gets bigger. For example, 3-unit, there's 266 of 3-unit buildings, only 64 are owner occupied. So we'll share these as we get better data, but just to kind of answer some of your points on that.
One question, just out-of-state ownership, because that can really change the complexion of a community.
So
Any
what
idea?
we're able to pull up here is really just, we're using homestead exemption numbers.
Ah, okay.
So we're really not getting any deeper than that level.
I would say that the biggest area where that would probably come into play, outside of Taylor Pond, is condominiums. There's 353 condominiums. 211 of them have filed for homestead exemption. You would probably assume that Delta is folks that do not qualify for homestead exemption because they're residents of Florida, and that would not be their primary residence. So that's a requirement of homestead. But again, I think we're getting close to that, but it is a fact to look at. So on that, I've got a couple more questions I think I'd like to have the council get some information on. Demographics, you're talking about active retirees and first-time home buyers, mobile professionals. Are you seeing any trends of where these people are coming from? Are these folks that are born and bred in Auburn, went away to college and coming back? Or are these folks that are new to the state or new to the region, i.e. from Portland or Bangor?
Well, statistically, when people move, they move actually within 19 miles of where they are currently. So we believe that most of them are local and they're familiar with the area. They have family, they have familiarity. You know, and we do have some great assets. You know, a lot of active older adults love to have the educational opportunities to continue to take classes and be physically fit, be physically active with Lost Valley and local hiking opportunities. I think when people look at, you know, the older adults, they think, well, they just need some place to go and sit. We don't have, that's not always the case. People want to be active, and I think that's really a benefit to what we have in Auburn because of all that we offer in town and, as I mentioned before, a gateway to other areas. Does that answer your question, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, it does. It does. It gives us some more insight. Going into Auburn versus others, so as people are coming and they're making selection, all things being the same, inventory and so forth, is Auburn first choice, third choice, equal amongst 3? Or is Auburn like, I can't find anything in Poland or Biddeford or Westbrook, I'm going to come to Auburn? And again, this is anecdotal.
Yeah, it depends what's going on in their world. A lot of times they're coming to Auburn because of family and familiarity. But if they're coming unattached to any particular area, quite honestly, I think we're losing the battle. You know, if they're coming north of Portland because of price point, I think they're going up $295 versus $95. I think when they go to Brunswick and they see the farmers market in the park and frisbees being thrown around and shops and there's a draw there, you know, whether you're ever going to use the Downeaster or not, to know that it's there, that's pretty cool. And you've got Bowdoin College. You know, they're capitalizing on a lot of things that they have to market. Their price point's a little bit higher than us, but not outrageously so. And then you take that same drive up the turnpike and get off exit 75.
It's a different view.
And
It's-
I'd also, the price point might be a little bit different, but is the tax rate different? So that house in Brunswick, while it might be a little more expensive
Right.
cost, it's actually lower.
Your monthly outlay could be lower depending on
right.
what you buy, yes.
Okay. Well, if you were, the king of Auburn, that would be my last question. If you're the king of Auburn and you didn't have a
I
parliament.
like where you're going with this.
I know. I'm playing your ego, I think, on this one. Only for about 5 minutes, though. You do one thing short term in order to start changing the trajectory of the city. You had one thing to do. Actually, I'll give you two. What would those two things be? Again, short term to start changing direction. Or, I'm sorry, let me ask you one more question before that. Do you think Auburn has been, over the last couple of years, changing direction? Do you think we're going in the right way? We call it wrong track, right track?
I think the high school has a lot to do with going in the right direction. So I'll take three, since one's already in progress with the high school. I think addressing our front porch is critical. The next layup would be the Gateway Drive-In. The first impression, again, is always critical. We have one shot at that. And I can't tell you how many people that I've met with that they come in, exit 75, and they go down Route 4 to my office, and by the time they get there, our search criteria for a new home has changed drastically. And then the third one, so that was the easy one. The third one would be the tax rate.
Is there any other questions for Mr. Dubois? I want to thank you very much. Is there anything you want to add? Anything that has popped up in your mind? I mean, you've got like 1 minute left being King of Auburn, so what else?
No, I get the easy job. I get to come share my opinion and then let you guys deal with it.
Okay, very good. Awesome. Thank you, Brian. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for the invitation.
One question before you go.
Yes, sir.
What would you do with the agricultural land that we've got locked up pretty solid in this city? What would you do in order to change it, sell it, keep it, don't do anything? What would you do?
I would change it and probably change it drastically.
Thank you.
That's a question.
We've got a lot of
What would you do with that?
agricultural, I'm preaching to the choir here, I think, but a lot of ag land tied up that is virtually useless under its current restrictions, so.
And part of it is heading towards the turnpike.
Yes, and you said I should move the Lake Auburn, but I think we were saying the same thing, just in a different way. I do believe there's a lot of opportunity around the lake should restrictions be loosened.
Yep.
And one last point, you started your conversation by saying that you're not an environmentalist, and this is the perspective of a real estate professional, so that land does have value just from a different perspective.
Sure. Yep.
But dollar and cents, so yeah, interesting. Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Go Falcons. You didn't get that.
This is a conversation that'll be ongoing, of course. I mean, I think we need some time to think about all this, but decisions and action need to be made. Current economic forecasts show about an 18-month spike or boom. After that, we're done. So time is critical here. We're going to move on. I'm going to go through a couple of procedurary items, and I'm going to go right into communications. I'm going to move the agenda around a little in that section. First, there are no consent items in tonight's agenda. Second, we have the minutes of the September 21st, 2020 regular council meeting. Are there any corrections? None being. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September 21st, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I got a motion from Councilor Carrier, second from Councilor Walker. All those approved? Approved, 7-0. We're in favor. Going to move on to communication. I'm going to change the order around. First, I'd like some business owner update regarding COVID-19. I'd like to bring in, we have some business owners. I believe they're both here.
I believe we have Inca and Genti in the other room. Brian, if you want to go grab them, that would be great. Maybe what we can start with is just a business owner's update as it pertains to what we were able to do last week with PPE distribution. So what we we're able to provide in the Keep Maine Healthy grant, we did put in supplies for businesses, small businesses. A lot of our businesses that are public-facing is what we were really focusing on. Some of our salons, restaurants, those type of commercial businesses. We reached out to over 50 small businesses. Was Wednesday? I think it was last Wednesday.
It was a blur.
And we were able to talk to a lot of the business owners and kind of get their perspective of what their biggest challenge is, what they're faced with. We did ask Inca to come in. She's the owner of 84 Court Street. She has her business that she's running, kind of the changes as a result of COVID. Some of what Inca's going to share are the same things that we heard from a lot of other businesses. I would say that businesses like Inca is really concerned with moving into that colder weather, but what we were hearing from a lot of businesses were workforce. And so that's something we'll be looking to kind of collaborate on. We'll work with the chamber. They're really focused. There's some work already being done there, but really workforce is where a lot of businesses right now would be open more. They would have hours back to what the normal hours would be, but the problem is they don't have the workforce, the staff to make that happen. We heard that consistently as we had conversations, but we've asked Inca to come and just share a little bit about her experience and the program that we were able to provide for Inca, and then also what's happening with her business. Thank you, Inca.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Enka Suli. I own the 84 Court. Me and my husband, we ran it together. So after March, we saw a huge difference. The first couple of weeks when COVID started was kind of like pretty much too much for us. We're lucky, from all the customers, and Lewiston and Auburn, community supported us a lot. Lucky we got the PPP loan and we got our employees back, but most of them, they didn't want to come back to work due to too scared. They didn't want to work with the conditions because, as we know, the kitchen is really hot. It's too much to work on the heat. At the same time, they didn't want to take the risk from the customers as well because you never know who's walking on the door. So it was a huge difference. The summer was pretty much good for us because we were lucky we had the patio. We added some changes. We fixed, we put awning. We did change some, set up on our patio. Again, our dining upstairs is not being used at all. On the same time, since I'm here, I want you guys to check pretty much, because from March till June 1st, our dining room is not being used at all. So we're still paying taxes for that. So not just for us, but for, for me as a restaurant, but all in the around the area, whoever stayed open just for takeout, we still pay taxes for the dining, for the seating, for the capacity, when we never had those. So again, right now towards that in the cold weather, we added some, heatings, the lamps, and but most of them, two of them are with the gas and two of them with electricity. So bringing us more, towards the dead for the electricity because keeping those lamps on, it's too much money. So we saw a difference between August and September. It was a huge difference, going down the sales because not a lot of people want to come outside anymore. And on the same time, we have a lot of our customers that said, we're still going to support you for takeout, but we don't want to dine in because they see in a closed area, it's more, risk for them. So it's going to be a challenge for us, after we close in the patio or when the really, really cold weather start. So.
Thank you, Inca. And I certainly want to open up for the council if you have any questions of Inca. And what Inca's sharing is what we've heard from a lot of businesses as we toured the city. And I think one thing that we're hearing and one thing that we're taking a look at is now how do we respond once we know the weather's changing? What does that look like? It's going to be critical for us to really advocate at a state level of now what resources can we be receiving at a state level to now take to that next step to be able to help some of our businesses, like Inca's, like many others, to be able to stay open. Because if we continue on the track that we are on, it's going to be challenging for businesses like ours to remain open. So, questions?
Thank you very much for presenting. I know that the city had funding that was for businesses to be able to expand to outdoors, to be able to buy some, chairs and things like that. Can we reverse that? Is there a way to help with small loans, for example, for, airflow or partitions or something like that? I don't know if that would be helpful to you, so that your indoor space, at least maybe the third floor, could be more useful. I'm not sure, but we did help people move out.
So the
was
current
successful.
grant that we're in, the Keep Maine Healthy grant, that we were able to purchase some of those items, so that expires in 21 days. And we've gotten no indication of another round at this point.
So and I talked to Phil about this earlier, I'll be reaching out to the governor because her deadline is arbitrary and she has excessive regulations on top of the federal regulations, which are much more loose with regards to the expenditure. The big problem right now is the governor probably is going to send $200 million back to the federal government because she's not getting it out to the businesses that need it. And that is a federal requirement. If it's not spent before December 20th, it has to be reimbursed. We're going to ask for her to use that money towards businesses. Other states, New Hampshire, I'll point to, based on a per capita rate, the municipalities are able to distribute exactly for those needs. Any type of business expenditure or to make up for lost revenues regarding the COVID pandemic. So we need to get at the last, I think at the 11th hour, get that money back from the governor in order to expend it to where businesses can use it. I'll copy you all in that correspondence.
If there was one thing, what would you need? Is it ventilation? Is it to be able to come back inside?
It's a ventilation, yep.
Okay. And that, that's thousands of dollars.
And it's absolutely appropriate and actually encouraged under the Federal CARES Act guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
I'm sorry, the name of your restaurant? and could you give us a street location?
Thank you.
Thank you. And the 4 tasty flavors of sangria to go? Maybe 5? We have another,
We can go right back up. No, Jim's not here.
Okay.
You didn't see Jim, right?
So we're back, okay, back on schedule? Very good, thank you. And thank you very much for doing that. Next on the communication, we actually have a guest, Marty Solowski. He's going to correct me on the pronunciation of his last name, and that's great. I hope he does. He is the new director of the Auburn Housing Authority. Took over from Rick Whiting several months ago. We've asked him to come in and talk to us a little bit about his vision and what he sees for AHA. Now, I don't want to butcher your last name again because of my ignorance. Could you please give us a pronunciation?
Pronounces a lot easier than it looks. It's essentially Sidlowski, as if it was S-I-D.
That's a good Italian name.
It is.
Yes, very
It
good.
ends in
Paisan.
I.
Marty, thank you very much for being here today.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you. I'm glad to take this off because I can either protect myself or I can see. So it's nice to be able to see. So thank you, everyone. What would you like?
Oh, well, first of all, we want to welcome you to the City of Auburn. Second, we just give us a brief explanation, maybe a little bio. Tell us a little bit about your vision, what you need from us, what you see, assets. I think we're on a SWOT roll right now, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But just a general overview and, how can we help you attain your mission?
Thank you. Well, most of my housing experience has been over a 12-year period. I worked at Brunswick Housing Authority. I started as a development officer, and then I was a finance director, and I left there as the deputy director. But development was key to the whole 12-year process. So the things that were highlighted earlier, I have experience in. For instance, when you're talking about 2-family and 3-family homes where landlords may be looking to retire. They've got 3 or 4 properties. So there are programs that are available to the housing authority through the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, the Affordable Housing Program, where you can do what's called acquisition rehab. So the Housing Authority could acquire them and invest money in them, in heating systems, insulation, windows, roofs, those types of things that make them airtight, make them more energy efficient. And then you get grants. It's a competitive process. And essentially, we would own them. They would be owned by the Auburn Residential Development Corporation. But then you can keep that housing stock. You can keep it affordable, and you can provide it to low-income individuals and families. So that's one thing that is available as part of the overall umbrella of the different housing challenges that we just heard and that you've been talking about. Secondly, one thing that we did in Brunswick and in the town of Harpswell was we had three first-time homebuyer subdivisions. So they varied in size. In Harpswell, we had a 14-home subdivision. In Brunswick, we had a 4-home subdivision and a 3-home subdivision based upon the amount of land that was available to you. And that, again, is a competitive process whereby the Federal Home Loan Bank will give you a grant, and they'll also, you earn it in that process. And you have you get construction loan at a good interest rate. And then your home buyers, so it's sort of a two-prong approach. The nonprofit is accessing capital to bring down the selling price of the house. And at the same time, you're working with your potential home buyer to go to rural development for the Section 502. It's a first-time home buyer's loan. So it's typically a low-interest loan, kind of hard to get lower than what interest rates are now, but it is a low-interest loan. Your interest rate is subsidized, and there's no down payment, and it's amortized over a 32-year period. So that makes that house affordable to a greater percentage of your population. And they have to have a credit score of 640 or more. And when I last did this, so I'm dating myself a little bit here, it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, in Cumberland County, the highest selling price on a house at that time was $225,000, but I don't know what Androscoggin County is, and I haven't looked that up. But so there are things that can be done. There certainly are things that can be done, and not so much all in one fell swoop, but over time you can start to take a look at the different legs of the stool that you're attempting to prop up the housing market and create more housing for your citizens. And there are ways that the Housing Authority could play a role in that process.
So, if I could, thank you very much for that. Just to reiterate, I want to make sure I got something correct. You're talking about not just subsidized housing on the rental side, but actually developing housing that can be utilized to supplement the market or jumpstart the market, first-time home buyers, people that normally wouldn't qualify for subsidized rental or actually want to move upward into a home.
These would be newly constructed homes on some sort of site. The approach that Federal Home Loan Bank takes is, unfortunately, you can't do it on a multiple site. I couldn't say, I've got an acre here, I've got 3/4 of an acre there, and I've got an acre and a half there, and I want to do all of this development, and I'm going to put in this grant. Unfortunately, it's not that fluid. So typically, what you might do then is to say, okay, I'm going to start with the acre and a half, and the number of units you can put on that is relative to the affordable housing ordinance that you have in the city. And it's been 7 months, and I've been dealing with COVID, so I don't know what the affordable housing ordinance is in the city of Auburn yet. But typically, that's how it would be. So, you might say now you could put 1 unit there, but the way that the ordinance is written, you could actually put 3 units there. So that starts, so all of a sudden you've taken the cost of a plot of land instead of assigning it to one unit, you've divided it by 3, and you've assigned it to 3 units, and you're already bringing down the cost of the home. So those are 2 primary ways that over time, we could certainly look into that, and Phil and I talked about that a little bit last week.
Do you have any questions for Marty? That right there was great. I mean, I don't think it could have been planned much better, Phil, thank you. Just the segue of everything we've been talking
Are
about.
there
So.
first-time home buyers?
Yeah, there are income guidelines based on the number of family members. And when you put in your application, you're doing a little bit of projecting because you're going to have, so let's just use a round number 10. So let's say we're going to build 10 houses in a subdivision. You might have 6 or 7 of those houses targeted for families that are earning 50% or less of area median income. Then you may have 2 houses that are for families earning 60% or less of area median income. And then the remaining houses would be for families earning at or less than 80% of area median income. Now, I'll tell you that when you're being competitive in a grant process, the more homes in a given subdivision that are geared towards the lower end of the income range, the more points you score. So there's a strategy from the provider of the grant that says we're going to create a scoring system that's going to benefit the lower end of the income scale. Okay, so in those types of things. And again, the density. You know, if you can get 8 units on an acre, you're going to score more points than if you don't get 8 units on an acre. So, those are just 2 of the scoring method, 2 of the scoring criteria that come to the top of my head. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you do something like that with a building that's got 4 units in one building? And turn them into ownership as opposed to keeping them rentals?
You know, I don't know that. I could check that out. I mean, typically what I'm used to is new construction for that program. But since we didn't have any, since what we did in Brunswick was when we had apartment buildings, we went out to purchase them and we did substantial rehab. So we did the acquisition rehab model. But I could always check into that and get back to you and let you know. So,
Is there any other questions? I mean, this is just kind of hey, first of all, anytime you want to speak and give us some of your insight, acknowledge from that, please do. I know we need to obviously continue talking as a council, as mayor, city management with you and your board, and make sure that you have everything you need from the city. And there's certain things that probably pop up right now after your introduction and thought process, and things that we might need to adjust and look at, i.e. an affordable house building zone with different requirements than a traditional urban residential, for example. So I think there's some back and forth that we can go with you, and we'd love to have your input and support you in your mission.
I realize I know what I'm doing tomorrow morning is I'm getting in my car and I'm driving around Auburn.
Well, geez, if you want to get some breakfast, let us know, okay? I got a couple spots where I'm sure you'll see most of it. And I like to, nice drive is good. But yeah, anytime you need anything, please just reach out, Marty.
Thank you.
No, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too. Anybody take notes on that? Okay. COVID-19 recovery and update. Next on the agenda, Deputy Chief Fifield.
Good evening, Council Mayor. I'll provide you a very quick update tonight on COVID-19. As I often do, I'll start with some of the numbers for the state. Confirmed cases in the state of Maine, 4,963. Probable cases in the state of Maine, 582, for a total case number of 5,545. Current death toll in the state of Maine, 142. Cumulative hospitalizations, 454. Total recoveries, cumulative recoveries, 4,807. Brings our active caseload in the state, 596. More close to home here in Androscoggin County, 689 confirmed cases, 82 probable cases, bringing our total cases to 771. death toll in our county still remains at 10. Cumulative hospitalizations in our county has increased by 3 over the last week to 52. Total recoveries in our county, 665, brings our active caseload to 96 active cases. Currently in Auburn, cumulative cases, 131. It's an increase of 2 over last week. Lewiston, a neighboring city, 413. That's an increase of 10 over last week. As you'll see, there's been a theme in the last month. I've been talking a lot about the testing increase in our state and more specifically in our county. So I'll talk about the last 14 days in the testing in our county. The last 14-day cycle, we've had over 12,000 tests completed in our county with 104 positive tests, giving our positivity rating of at 0.9%. Just to put that in perspective, back on August 3rd, we were doing that last 14-day period, we did 3,200 tests with a 1.3% positivity rate. The 104 positive tests does not mean 104 cases, but rather 77 cases because multiple tests may be used on the same patient. As I've also said in the past, we really need to keep close eye on our hospital data locally. As I said, 3 new hospitalizations in the last week. Statewide, currently we have 10 people in critical care treatment. 10 people in the hospital, 1 receiving critical care treatment and 1 using a ventilator. I think the most impactful thing right now for our community is not the impact on the hospital, but rather the increase in testing, which is needed to identify the illnesses in our community. But that is the impact that it has on our community, whether it's the school, the business, or even the city of Auburn. I can tell you, because I have firsthand knowledge, many of the situations are very laborsome. For example, recently in one of our schools, we had a positive case. The SOPs that you have to follow internally and through the state certainly can take up a lot of time in notifying people that need to quarantine, seek testing, work out testing for them, and then receive those results and adjust your reactions based on that. If I could, I'd offer a little bit of advice to the public. Keep it simple. I said this long ago, it seems like. Many months I've been saying this. If you're sick, stay home. Call your doctor. If you're awaiting a test, stay home. If you're sick, notify your employer or the school that you go to. Take good care of yourself. Wash your hands. I think we've heard that before. Avoid touching your face and mouth. I can tell you, people need to remind themselves frequently about the symptoms of COVID. That has been a problem the last few weeks. Some simple situations, if people would have listened to their body and stayed home, we would have reduced the amount of infection in our community. As I often do, I'll give you a little piece of data to end with, puts a few things in perspective for you. Back on May 16th, we had 56 active cases. Through a period from May 16th, over a week, we increased to 140 active cases. On May 16th, we had only completed 33,000 tests in the entire state. Through that week, we increased that by 5,000 tests and got to 140 active cases in the state. Today, we have 96 active cases, and we have completed over 460,000 tests in the state of Maine. Available for any questions.
Does the testing number that you provided, does that include institutional testing? For example, Bates College is testing all of their staff weekly?
All tests in the state of Maine eventually have to be reported through the state online system, and yes, so they are all reported there.
So just the difference there would be that for institutional testing like that, that's a mechanism for surveillance. It's not necessarily individuals who are experiencing symptoms and want to know whether they're sick with COVID or sick with the flu. So I think that the number is inflated, particularly recently when we've seen institutions like Bates College come online.
Yeah, you'll see that recently if you follow any of the reports they send out. Over the last month, you've seen well over 1% increase on the under 20 population.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, hold on, but weren't we saying, I just want to clarify something. When we start talking about inflating the testing numbers, that's been the goal, is to test more and more and more and more often, right?
And that as a negative. I'm just saying that the number, when folks think about testing, oftentimes they think about because there's a sick individual, but organizations are remaining open, like Bates College, because they're testing everyone weekly to ensure that they're able to control an outbreak. But when you look at that number and you see super high testing rates and a low positivity rate, that's reflective of communities doing, these populations doing that kind of surveillance. It's not necessarily a reflection of
And a lower infection
their
rate.
burden. Well,
And a lower
the more you
infection rate.
test, the necessarily that number will go down, is my point, but.
Okay, that's counter to everything I was told for the last 8 months. Counselor.
I'm surprised you didn't mention about mask wearing and social distancing. You talked about washing hands and not touching your face, but, between now and January, if everybody wore a mask, we'd prevent 100,000 people from dying. So I think mask wearing really needs to be foregrounded when we talk about, when you mention about how we prevent this. And can you say a little bit about, in the fire department, what has been done to address the positive case there, in terms of any change in protocols or anything?
So 2 weeks ago, we had one singular case in the fire department from an exposure to a COVID-19 patient outside of work. We have policies in places, for example, training. For example, we do a very limited amount of training at this point, and when we do, we have policies in place for social distancing, masking, doing training in the particular firehouse rather than bringing them into Central Station, for example. So yes, we've had those policies in place. We often evaluate, as we did recently with that situation, and really look at the social distancing part of it and how do we not mix the crews too much and impact a larger body of the staff, because we ultimately had nine staff that were quarantined for a period of time, not including the person that was ill.
And that's got to be tough on you, but good job.
Excuse me, I didn't.
It's got to be tough when you've got to have 9 people sort of out for 2 weeks. So.
Yeah, it is. And just to go back to your point about the masking, masking certainly a mandate by the state. I wasn't indicating that that wasn't important. Social distancing is obviously very important. I was just saying from my perspective right now, what is causing some of the issues in our school system or in some of the businesses, those situations where people went to work sick, where everybody in the house was sick and the children still went to school, or the employees at a particular business, one was awaiting a test and they all got together. So those are important situations, and those are just my personal experience in the last few weeks.
Thank you.
Councilor Gear, then Councilor Milks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had a discussion during one of your meetings here about probable cases. If, for whatever reason, if I came close to somebody that was tested positive and I go, I'm supposedly a probable case. If my test is negative, does my probable number go away, or does it still stay in the total?
So just to clarify at the beginning, you are not probable. So the example would be if you came in close contact, that's 15 minutes or more within 6 feet of somebody that was positive, you're not considered a probable case at that point unless you become symptomatic. Those are probable cases. Your second question, I haven't been able to get that answer from anyone at the state about removing people that are probable after a test, or anybody that's been assigned that. Occasionally you see a small fluctuation, and that's usually when somebody was assigned probable, then tests positive and moves to the positive or confirmed side of that.
But you also said the other way that to be removed from the list is if you passed away.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Councilor Milks.
Thank you.
We are in a state of emergency today. In your professional opinion, being in the emergency business, is this an emergency?
I think it's certainly an emergency because I'll say that COVID-19, in my experience, transmits much easily than any other virus that I've handled. Now, I've been dealing with this for a short period of time, so limited view. But but the emergency is the transmission into a elderly population where somebody's going to die. That's why we work so hard for our schools, for our workplace, to make sure we limit that infection with the increased testing and identify those situations. I certainly think there's some consequences that we have because of that, as I said earlier, impacts on businesses or our school or even the employees here in the city of Auburn.
Is there, in your opinion, are there other things that we can be doing? Can we be more open and still protecting those high-risk folks and doing things as a society that, especially looking at going into the winter months, that are going to allow folks like the young lady that was here earlier today that's going to lose her business if she can't have folks coming in?
Yeah, we're a little limited, at the state level as far as her business is concerned, as far as loosening those restrictions locally. I did speak earlier about what I think people can do differently, and I'll stand by that be aware of your health, don't go to work, don't go to school if you're sick. If you've been sick, don't go to meet your grandmother at the nursing home. A lot of the nursing homes, we stay in contact with them regularly through the fire department. They have policies in place. The state has focused a lot of time on making sure they have good visitor policies. They're limiting the contact and the cross-contaminations from one area to another in a nursing home. Those things are very important because that is where we could see significant outbreaks, and not just outbreaks, but deaths.
Any other questions? Done. Deputy Chief, thank you. I'll move on to council communications. Anybody in the council have a communication of an upcoming community event that they'd like to share?
I got one for you.
Councilor Walker?
Yeah, if you don't mind. The Age-Friendly Committee has decided that they're going to put a bean supper fundraiser together. That's going to be Saturday, October 17th. And what we're going to do is, first of all, you're going to have to call in to the Recreation Department and put your order in because we can't go inside, meaning the people that want beans, hot dogs, coleslaw, bread to go. All of this is to call in, put your order in so we know pretty much how much we need to prepare for October 17th. Now you can come to Pettingill Park at 5 o'clock up to 6:30 as long as you've called in to order your bean dinner to go. There'll be a small cookie, there'll be a bottle of water, and then of course the beans and hot dogs, and you'll tell us if you want brown or red. Now you only have until October 15th to put your orders in, and I think it's 2:30 that day is up to the limit. So you've got all this week and almost all of next week to put your order in and help us out. It's $7 for your dinner complete. Take it home and or just eat it in your car if you'd like, but I'd suggest you take beans and hot dogs home. Won't be quite so messy. But it's something that we wanted to do and keep the price down as low as we possibly could and make it work. And of course, we're reaching out for the senior citizens to be able to do this. And we try to keep it so we wouldn't be in the dark too far. So 5 to 6:30, $7. And again, October 17th, that's a Saturday. We hope you can show up and pick up your beans and hot dogs.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about that? Is that cash only when they pick up or
Yeah,
prepay?
please, cash only, and make it a lot easier for everyone down there. And please bring the exact amount. It's a lot easier too than me handling dollar bills all day long.
Okay. Very good. Is there
Council
any other?
Walker, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, could I ask Council Walker one question on this?
Yeah.
Thank you. Would you accept checks? Vote
Yeah.
for the exact amount?
Yeah, and if they bounce, they will let you collect them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to open session. Anybody in the public like to speak in tonight's first open session on any other subject other than beans? Members of the public are invited to speak to the council about any issue that's directly related to city business, which is not on tonight's agenda. Please state your name and address and limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Okay. We're going to close this first open session of the night. We have no one here. Unfinished business, there is none. New business, there is an ordinance 06-1005-2020, adopting the new general assistance maximums. This is a public hearing and first reading. Okay, this is a reference back to workshop with Holly Olivier. Also, I just want to make a note. This is on the agenda that was posted. It has since been corrected. The correct order number is 06-1005-2020. Okay, so there was a slight typo. Just want to make sure everybody has that correct. I'll entertain a motion.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Gary, second by Councilor Boss. Public hearing. I'll open this up to the public. Is there anybody here that would like to speak? None being, I'll move this back to the council. Council, is there any debate or comment on this? None being, I'd like to move to a vote. Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Lasagna?
Yes.
Counselor McLeod?
Yes.
Counselor Milks?
Yes?
Counselor Carrier?
Yes.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
Counselor Boss?
Yes.
Counselor Gary?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, vote 7-0. Next, we have order number 123-1005-2020, setting the special city council meeting dates for the charter review. There was a typo in this one again. Obviously, these things kind of happen in sequence. It's 123-1005-2020. So not one, excuse me, so that's it. I'll entertain a motion at this time.
To accept.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Walker, second by Councilor Carrier. Public comment? None being. I'll bring this back to the council. Council, any discussion? Just to remind everybody, this is just our special meetings, in addition to the regular meetings that shall appear as a workshop item to go through this. If at one point we do need to add more meetings, because time is there, we do things as standard, not to time, so that's acceptable. Fair enough? Okay, I'll ask for a roll call vote at this time.
Mayor, point of information. Now, if we're going to work this, will public be able to do any input?
There's always a public hearing after we're done our work, and then it will finally go to a vote.
Mr. Mayor, actually, these are being approved as a special meeting. So at a special meeting, if there's public comment, there'll be public comment at each one of those meetings for that.
And there's still the public reading afterwards.
Then there's a full
and
process.
The full process.
The reason for having it be a special meeting is so that you could, rather than having a workshop and for staff to try to determine where's consensus, you can actually go ahead and make some motions and move forward with each one of those categories. And then the whole package would be what would be adopted later.
Very good. Roll call vote, please.
Counselor Lasagna?
Yes.
Counselor McLeod?
Yes.
Counselor Milks?
Yes?
Counselor Carrier?
Yes.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
Counselor Boss?
Yes.
Counselor Gary?
Yes.
Order passes 7-0. Open this up to the second open session of the night. We don't have anyone here, so we're going to move along to reports. Mayor's report, keep it pretty quick. The Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee on Boards and Committees plans on presenting to you in just a couple weeks. We will have a draft kind of final wrap-up meeting with the committee as a kind of a proposal. More information is going to come out from Brian Wood on that, but it's moving along quickly. I think by the end of October, we're slated to workshop that and then make some decisions in November, correct, Mr. Manager?
Yes, it'll be October 19th.
19th meeting. So by October 19th, you're going to get a preview. You're going to like it. I think it's going to be good. So like a lot of the other things we're talking about as a city, efficiency, streamlined, and really some great output. So thank you very much for working on that, everybody who's been involved. Second, if you haven't yet, and thank you all councilors for being there on Saturday. If you weren't there and public weren't there, please look on our YouTube channel and watch the dedication of the bell tower that houses the bells from St. Louis. It was a really nice event, and it's been just such a long time since we've had an event like that in the city. It was kind of fun. So check it out, everybody. I think it was wonderful. Also, you'll see in the press that we broke ground on the new Auburn Suburban Baseball Softball League fields. I want to thank Mr. Cousins specifically, who's here, Mark Goslin, who's not here, for all their work they've done with this, and as well as the group of volunteers on the board of Auburn Suburban. It's going to be a phenomenal and unique baseball softball complex when done, really one with nature, and not just a flat field with a bunch of clover leaves. It's going to be quite interesting. So I think we're going to be happy, and it'll blend well in with the community. That's all my reports. I'd like to move on to council reports. And for the essence of time, are there any councilors that have a report they'd like to make right now in any upcoming committee or subcommittee meetings? Councilor Zanya?
I'll try and be quick. This is the School Building Committee. They are starting the process of recordation because there's some things in the school building that are of historical value, believe it or not, so they have to go through and look at it and record everything. Just know that in terms of the bid process, bids will be due January 12th, 2021. The whole process going through and creating the RFP and everything is going on now and being approved by the DOE. And finally, just so people know that there are portions of what were planned for the schools that are now called deduct alternates, depending on how the funding goes through. Second turf field, some doors, landscaping, theater system, storage building, softball and baseball dugouts. So if you want to know the list, there is a list of things that may not be included depending on how it all ends up being costed out and in terms of fundraising. And the fundraising committee is going to be getting back together again for the first time, I don't know, since COVID, I think. That's it.
Yep, thank you very much. Any other reports from committees? Councilor Gary, then Councilor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This sort of is not a report, but could we please, before the night's over, have a moment of silence for Mayor Jenkins, who passed? And could we please get an update if there's any word on any sort of arrangements for a funeral that the good city manager's been trying to put his ear out so that we can honor him? John Jenkins, he was a mayor of Auburn, Lewiston, and a state senator.
I think if you're calling for a moment of silence right now, I think we probably should. And as we've been moving through, sometimes you fail to stop and remember. And yes, Mayor Jenkins is a good friend, and his passing will be sorely missed in this community. So if you all could please join us, and let's just take a moment to remember former Mayor Jenkins. Thank you. And thank you for reminding me, Councilor Gary. I will say that I had a meeting with Mayor Kayer from Lewiston, and I think it's very applicable that we join forces, considering he's mayor of both cities. And we already are starting to talk. We've briefed in city managers a little. We're going to keep doing that, and the council will get updated as time goes on, but I think it will be fitting and appropriate. So, is there anything else? Any other reports? Councilor McLeod, you had one, yes.
Yes, last Thursday, the transit study kickoff meeting happened. Our study should be completed around August of 2021. We're going to meet every other month via Zoom to go over the progress of the new transit study. So hopefully we'll have a super great functional bus system. And just to piggyback off Councilor Lasagna, you can go to newelhs.org and see all the meeting info and the pictures and all of the stuff that they talked about and the recordation and the list of deductive alternatives. And we go before the State Board of Education November 4th as our tentative date to get the final school approval from them before we can start doing everything else.
Okay, very good, thank you. Any other councilors? Councilor Walker?
I'd just like to piggyback on your anniversary park. That park was in excellent shape on Saturday. We had a beautiful day, but Public Works went down there to make sure on Thursday and Friday that that thing was in tip-top shape for all of us to enjoy. And I also want to say thank you to Eric and everyone that worked with him. He's been there unbelievable hours to make sure that that park was in really tip-top shape for where we are at this point with that park. So it was a great job, and I know not everybody is a Republican Party here, but we had Susan Collins there, and she really had a great day being with us. And I was pretty proud to see us kick this park off the way we did, and with the bell tower that we put in place to hold the St. Louis bells, and it was great to hear them ring. About every 15 minutes, I think Eric had them going off, but it was great to hear the tunes and the sounds that were coming out of them bells, and it made a lot of people happy that day. So thank you, everybody.
And do they ring every day at noon, correct?
Every hour.
They ring on the hour.
Every hour, so it's really worth going to hear them. They're fantastic.
They stop by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so we don't disturb the people that live in the area.
And I do have photographic proof of Eric Cousins an hour and a half before the ceremony with a backpack leaf blower, blowing all the grass clippings and dirt off the park. Kind of scared me there a little bit, but I'm glad he was doing it. Okay, we're going to move on now to our city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I would echo Council Walker, just Mr. Cousins going above and beyond, bringing his backpack blower in and getting things done. So a few things for your report. First is a voting grant. The city clerk made our grant writer aware of a grant opportunity that had become available from the Center for Tech and Civic Life organization. The center had secured a $250 million contribution to assist in local election jurisdictions across the country. So we did apply for that grant. We got word on September 30th that we received the grant in the amount of $262,187. So the eligible expenditures are to purchase equipment, materials, supplies to ensure social distancing, signage, tents, traffic control, safety measures, staff, cleaning, and sanitization costs and training for our upcoming elections. So we will be working to do that. For those who have been following along, the voter drop-off ballot box will be hopefully installed by Wednesday, I think is our goal, our target time. That'll be outside of Auburn Hall, and the courtyard is where that will be available. We did have staff take a look and assess the different areas. It just did not work the way that our configuration is in the parking lot for a drive-up drop box to be able to monitor all those things. So outside in the courtyard was the best location for that. So Sue and her team are working on getting all those materials. We will be able to enhance a lot of what we were doing. As Liz had pointed out, I think we have mailings going out. We have different things that are taking place. We're securing stickers for I voted, Councilor McLeod's goal. And so we'll be trying to get those out as much as we can.
Wait, hold on. We got $260,000 for a voting grant?
$262,000.
My fault. So what's our average annual voting budget or election budget? It's like 7,000, isn't it?
No, it's about 50,000.
Don't correct me too quickly, Jill.
I had to figure it out for the grant.
So
Right there.
So this is awesome. This is great. This is actually a several year.
Great news.
Great news. Wow. Thank you.
May I just ask a question? I hope that there'll be good signage in all entries to Pettingill Park, because, again, everybody thinks everybody knows where that is, and there are a lot of people who don't know where that is, and I've been giving them directions, Wilson Street, and you can't, it's not easy to find, but
Tough to find.
good big signs to all the entrances would be extremely helpful. I promised people that there would be good signage.
We'll have good signage. We are, I think we've reported before regarding the electronic message signs that are going up. Those will be in those areas where we have some voting. That'll be clear, one in New Auburn area, one right here in Auburn Hall, which will then allow for the trailer message signs to be used for Pettingill.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest if you don't know where Pettingill Park is, don't trust yourself to find it that day. Get out, roam around, drive Dennison Street and Gamage Avenue, find your way back down into that area.
We encourage people to go to our app, our voting hub, because if you go to that and you use the app on Where's My Ward, that will also immediately bring you to a link. And then that will also map you to right where you need to go. We also will be able to work in at each of the polls. So if you look at your app, we're going to be working in the how long's my wait. So we'll have some students that are there making that available as well. So people can look and say, oh, it's convenient now. I can look at what the wait time is and come right down and be able to do that. So we're very excited about receiving those funds.
Will there be police presence at each polling place, or that? I mean, I know that's not usual. I'm just curious.
So normally we have police presence, especially during a presidential, if it's in a school. And really it's just to make sure that the school, that separation into the school while the students are there. We didn't really see a need for it in this case, so we won't be having a presence, other than maybe some traffic issues. We will probably be having something at the, coming out of Auburn Hall and also at Pettingill. Feel pretty good about how the traffic will flow, but we'll monitor New Auburn as well. So, next I have the LPC. This is the Legislative Policy Committee out of MMA. It's part of their advocacy efforts. You have the mayor, myself, and Brian as our alternate on that committee. That group met to talk about the upcoming legislative session for 2021 and 2022. The committee voted to endorse what we call Protect the Core Plus. Protect the Core Plus really as far as revenue sharing, reimbursement for homestead exemption, state funding for education, and funding for broadband expansion. Those are the areas that, as a advocacy group, we'll focus on as if any bills are introduced. Any that are focused on this is where we'll spend our time. But the LPC will not be submitting any new legislation before the legislators in this next session. We're working on protecting the core. And again, that's moving revenue share up to 5% of state sales, income tax, and 100% reimbursement for homestead exemption. That would be the plus. We're currently not getting that full 100% homestead exemption, but. Next, voting day. We were already talking a little bit about voting day. Again, as many of you know, here in Auburn Hall, we will be having 2 wards. One ward will be here in the council chambers. The second ward will be in the community room. But then we also have folks that will be coming in to register and to provide good, safe distancing for the added staff that Sue will be having downstairs. We will be closing the tax office for that day. We can't have people coming in for the tax office and people coming in to vote and not knowing which line is for what. And then once we bring 5 people in for the tax office, that's really what we're allowing in that area. It really will impact our numbers. We've talked with Matt just about being able to move people throughout the building safely. So we figured that's the best thing to do. What we will be doing is for Jill and her team, they'll be training that day. We're bringing in, through Zoom technology, we're going to be bringing in a trainer regarding some updates to the Munis system that they work with. So they're going to be doing some training for that day collectively as a group, which will be beneficial. Normally, they don't have everyone training together because we're always open. So we'll be pushing that out so people are aware of it. The Lake Auburn Study RFP group has been meeting. Councilor Carrier and Councilor Gary are on that committee, and we've had several meetings already. We're really at a phase of where we'll be finalizing the RFP request. That will be coming before you. I just want to give you a heads up. You've already workshopped this in the sense of creating the committee. You've already workshopped their task. They'll then be bringing you back. Councilor Gary and Councilor Carey will be the ones presenting, but they'll present this to you in a form of an order at a future meeting. Probably will not be on the 19th. We've already looked at our timeline, but we're hoping for November 2nd. That'll come before you on an order. The reason I have it on the order would be so if you want to make any adjustments, changes to that, you'll do it as amendments right there at the meeting, and so we can move that forward. We didn't see any need to workshop that again because you've already done that. The U.S. Census, 2020 Census, just want to give you an update on this. If you remember when this first launched, then City Manager Creighton kind of tasked me with being the point person for us as a city. Currently as a state, we are 99.9% complete for U.S. Census. So as a state, we're doing very well in comparison to other states. As a city, what I don't have where we are as a city as far as completion. They don't provide you that ranking. But I do know what we, as a city, as a state, self-response. So if somebody they received their census information, they went online, they called, or they mailed it in, was at 58% For Auburn, our self-response was at 65.9%. About 50% used the internet to do their U.S. Census response. So I think as a community, I think we're in good shape. That means about 40%, I guess I do have the breakdown because I have the 40%. 40% were follow-up, which means the U.S. Census team were out doing follow-up door-to-door, getting people to continue responding back. So I think as a community, I think we've done very well getting information out. We've tried to push this as much as we could early on. Then things obviously shifted with COVID, but I think they did a good job. They still were out doing it safely and doing follow-up, sometimes by phone or whatever it might have been. So, so just a real brief update on the census. Just a reminder, the October 24th will be our retreat date, so I just want to make sure people recall that and block that off on your schedules. That's it for my update.
We move on to Jill Eastman with a finance report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. You have the August report, so I'm going to keep it brief since you're going to have the September one at the next meeting. But if you took a look at it, you can see that most of our revenues are above where we were last year. The excise tax, we were up $186,000. I think a small portion of that was left over from when people didn't register, but those were supposed to be paid by July, the middle of July, so it should be just a small amount of that. The property tax revenue was lower in August, but the bills went out about a week to 10 days later than they did last year because we had staff turnover, so it took us a little longer to get the bills out. And then the revenue sharing, we're $102,000 over where we were last year in August. So, and the homestead, because of the increase in the homestead, we had increased participation in the homestead exemption, as well as we get more money back from the state. It went from like 62% to 70%, I believe is what it is. So we were $411,000 more than what we got last year at this time. So.
But there still shows, I mean, I maybe the homestead, not to interrupt, but homestead, whereas we got a higher reimbursement, we had higher participation as well. So it's still taking away from our overall tax base, correct?
It is.
Okay.
And on the expenditure side, we were only at 11% because last year we had $2 million worth of debt service that got posted in August. The debt service is actually due in September. So it's just a timing thing. You'll see that big hit in September.
How do you feel?
We had $9 million due September 1st.
Confidence level and everything?
I'm
Going well?
fine.
Great.
Yeah, I'm doing fine, yeah.
The only variable that you can see probably in the horizon is state revenue share going down due to decrease in sales tax acquisition?
They're saying, we'll watch it. I think we're gonna be fine because of the way we budgeted. We were very conservative when we budgeted, so I don't think we're gonna have an issue at the end.
Okay, make sure that's in the minutes. Thank you very much. Any questions for Jill?
I just had a quick question. Does the recent state curtailment affect us at all in our budget?
Not yet.
Okay.
I haven't
Perfect.
seen anything. No, I
Okay,
haven't seen anything.
thank you.
I'll entertain a motion at this time to accept and place on file the August 2020 monthly finance report.
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Carrier, second from Councilor Walker. All those in favor? Approved by a vote of 7-0.
Mr. Mayor, just one clarification. My report clerk reminded me, she did do some research. State guidelines and rules says we cannot hand out voting stickers at the voting polls. So that will not be handed out, but we'll have them. We'll try to make them available in some way.
Hold on. Is this a new law?
This is one of the guidelines for voting poll locations.
Oh, guidelines, but not requirements. Very good. Permission versus approval. We got you, Councilor McLeod. Next, we have an executive session And by the way, before we go into executive session and give the reason and get a vote, I will say this is the last item on the agenda. Once we are complete our executive session, we will be coming back and adjourning for the evening. I have an executive session to discuss a real estate matter pursuant to 1 MRSA, Section 405, subsection 6C. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion, Councilor Milks, and a second from Councilor Walker. All those in favor?
Yeah.
We're approved. We now stand in executive session.